Hogwarts, my magical girlfriend Hermione. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination. So don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like. And if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 151 Grimmauld Place 12 Good. The hustle and bustle of King's Cross Station was left far behind. Farewells were always rushed. The Weasley family, along with Harry and Hermione, vanished almost instantly into the green flames of Floo powder, heading to that mysterious place called headquarters. Lynn's journey was slightly different. He first returned to his temporary residence in London, a small apartment arranged by Professor Dumbledore, with simple concealment charms, through more conventional means, carefully organizing essential items, mainly notes and equipment related to star magic research and alchemy tools. After confirming everything was in order, he grasped a pinch of glittering Floo powder and clearly pronounced the address Dumbledore had given him, number 12. Grimmauld Place. After a familiar dizziness and spin, he stumbled out of an old fireplace into a dim space filled with a faint smell of mildew and dust. The first things that caught his eye were the towering ceilings and the thick dust accumulated on the crystal chandelier. The dim light made everything in the hall appear shadowy. Peeling wallpaper, grotesque black lacquered serpent-shaped candelabras, and rows of terrifying decorations made from house elf heads on the walls all spoke of the old mansion's past oppression and darkness. Close the door, creature. Don't let the dirty air from outside in. A slightly sharp female voice came from somewhere in the front hall. Lynn turned around and saw a large, moth-eaten curtain, seemingly covering a portrait. The frame was shaking violently. Clearly the owner of the voice was obscured and thus more agitated. Before he could look closely, a figure quickly darted past him. The house elf creature muttered in his hoarse, deep, bullfrog-like voice, but still dutifully closed the fireplace screen behind Lynn, sealing off the Floo network. Another mudblood and blood traitor has come, defiling my mistress's house. Oh, if only my poor mistress knew, creature grumbled, giving Lynn a disgusted look with his large eyes, then vanished with a pop. Lynn raised an eyebrow, not surprised by this welcome. Don't mind the old fellow, a familiar voice said with a laugh. Lynn followed the sound and saw Ron and Hermione peeking out from a dark corridor. Hermione's face showed a hint of helplessness, having clearly heard creature's greeting, but upon seeing Lynn, her eyes immediately lit up, and she quickly walked over. You're here. Was the journey smooth? She naturally took a not too heavy luggage bag from Lynn's hand, carefully examining his face. How do you feel? Is there anywhere you feel uncomfortable? Everything went smoothly, and I feel much better than yesterday. Lynn smiled, letting her check him over, his gaze quickly scanning her to confirm she was in good condition before looking up at the eerie hall. So, this is number 12, Grimmauld Place, the old ancestral home of the House of Black. A slightly tired but warm voice interjected. Molly Weasley walked in from the direction of the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour, a warm smile on her face that was enough to dispel some of the gloom of the old house. Welcome, dear. I'm Molly Weasley, Ron's mother. Was your journey alright? Don't stand here, the living room is a bit brighter, though not by much, she chattered, greeting him like a mother genuinely welcoming her child home, which brought a warmth to Lynn. Thank you, Madam Weasley, just call me Molly. Dear, come on, Harry and the children are all upstairs. Cleaning up this house really is, sigh, it's accumulated too many bad things. Molly shook her head, leading them towards the stairs. The stairs were equally dim, and the portraits on the walls watched the new visitors with cold or scrutinizing gazes. They stopped before a door, on which hung a grand but slightly crooked plaque that read Sirius Black. The door was open inside. It was even messier than downstairs, furniture covered in white sheets, dust pervasive. Harry, Ron, and a handsome man with black hair, a haggard face but sharp eyes, were waving their wands, trying to make an old wardrobe clean itself. The wardrobe clearly wasn't cooperating, emitting creaking protests. The man turned at the sound, and upon seeing Lynn, a flicker of curiosity and scrutiny crossed his gray eyes, quickly transforming into a slightly wild and unrestrained smile. Looks like our last guest has arrived. He put away his wand, stepped over the clutter on the floor, and extended his hand to Lynn. Sirius Black, the current owner of this dilapidated house. Welcome to my, cozy little home. He laughed at his own words, with a sense of liberation that came from finally gaining a bit of freedom after long suppression. Lynn Evans, sorry to intrude, Mr. Black. Lynn shook his hand, "Call me Sirius." He clapped Lynn heartily on the shoulder, his gaze shifting between him and Hermione, a different meaning in his smile. "Hermione's been talking about you for days. Worried you hadn't fully recovered. Now it seems Madame Pomfrey's medical skills are as reliable as ever." Hermione's face immediately flushed, and she protested softly. Sirius, Harry, watching from the side, also broke into his first genuine, relaxed smile in a while. Ron, meanwhile, made a face after a brief exchange of pleasantries. The cleaning continued. Lynn also joined, and he found that the cleaning here wasn't just about sweeping away dust, but more about dealing with dangerous objects that bore traces of the dark arts or extreme pureblood ideology. Hermione, while directing an old pair of scissors to cut open dusty curtains, quietly explained the situation to Lynn. "This is the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix." She kept her voice very low, audible only to the two of them. "Professor Dumbledore arranged it. Many members come here for meetings. We have to be careful. Some things are very dangerous." Lynn nodded, his fingertip imperceptibly brushing against a serpent-shaped decoration on the wall that tried to bite him. A tiny trace of starlight magic flashed, and the decoration instantly quieted down, becoming dull and lifeless. Hermione looked at him in surprise, and he returned a look that said, "It's nothing." The cleaning work was tedious but unexpectedly reassuring. Although the environment was terrible, everyone was together, busy for the same goal, which temporarily diluted the shadows hanging over their hearts. The Weasley twins, from who knows what corner, dug out some strange dark arts objects, prompting loud warnings from Sirius, who nevertheless couldn't resist studying them with them. Laughter occasionally breaking the silence of the old house. In the evening, more people returned. Remus Lupin, with a tired but gentle smile, joined the cleaning. Kingsley Shacklebolt's tall figure briefly appeared, exchanged a few quiet words with Sirius, then hurried away. Even Mad-Eye Moody's magical eye vigilantly scanned the corridor from behind a portico dark and old. This place was filled with a busy and secret vitality. The members of the Order of the Phoenix gathered and moved here like an undercurrent, preparing for the coming storm. Dinner was a lavish meal prepared by Molly in the small, gleaming kitchen. The long dining table was crowded with people, and the atmosphere was lively. Although the food was simple, everyone sat together, temporarily forgetting the dangers outside, enjoying this rare, noisy moment of reunion. After dinner, Lynn and Hermione found a small balcony on the third floor. It was relatively clean, with an open view, overlooking London's grey night sky and distant scattered lights. The night breeze dispersed the stuffy air of the old house. The two stood side by side, leaning against the railing, looking down at the quiet square below. "It feels a bit strange," Hermione said softly, with a touch of emotion in her voice. "Even though it's in such a place full of dark history, I feel more at ease here than during those last few days at Hogwarts, because we're not fighting alone anymore." Lynn looked at the distant twinkling starlight, feeling the warmth from the person beside him. "Though dangerous, you know you have companions beside you, and preparations are being made." He turned his head to look at Hermione. The moonlight outlined the serious profile of her face, and his voice softened even more. "You're here?" Hermione turned her head, met his gaze, her cheeks slightly warm. But she didn't look away. The light on the balcony was dim, but they could clearly see the faint glow in each other's eyes. She softly acknowledged, lowering her head, but a faint curve appeared on her lips. The sound of Muggle cars driving by came from the street below, distant and blurred. It was quiet on the balcony, with only the sound of the gentle breeze. Lynn's hand lightly touched the back of her hand, then slowly took hold. Hermione's fingers moved slightly, then relaxed, intertwining with his palms pressed together. Warmth spread from the point of contact, dispelling the slight chill of the night wind. They didn't speak again, just quietly held each other's hands, gazing at the same star-dusted sky. Somewhat dimmed by the city lights behind them was the ancient and dark House of Black, where the secret forces against darkness were stationed. Before them was a vast and unknown world, hiding layer upon layer of dangers. But at this moment, on this small balcony, they only felt the warmth of each other's palms and the close proximity of their breaths. A silent understanding and peace flowed between them, as if no matter how many hardships and obstacles the future held, as long as they could stand side by side like this, holding each other's hands tightly, they would possess the courage to face everything. Number 12, Grimmauld Place, a place that once represented pure blood fanaticism and darkness, was quietly becoming the starting point of new hope and protection. And for Lynn and Hermione, it was also their first temporary, shared home in this summer of impending storms. Chapter 152, Starlight Workshop. Life at Number 12, Grimmauld Place was not entirely depressing. Under Molly Weasley's almost obsessive cleaning fervor and Sirius's destructive cleaning methods, the old house was gradually shedding its eerie and terrifying exterior. Although still far from cozy, it had at least become habitable. and in some corners, new life was even beginning to sprout. The biggest change occurred in a secluded suite on the 4th floor. This place originally belonged to a distant relative of the House of Black, long abandoned, with dust piled up like mountains, and unsettling, slowly wriggling dark patterns on the wallpaper. But its location was hidden enough, the space was spacious enough, and it had a huge north-facing window that offered a clear view of the starry sky at night. Lynn and Hermione almost simultaneously took a liking to it. "This place needs a thorough cleaning," Hermione said, hands on her hips, her eyes scanning the dusty laboratory benches and empty bookshelves, as if seeing infinite potential, especially the defenses. "What we're researching cannot have any interference, nor can it interfere with others. Leave it to me." Lynn nodded. He walked to the center of the room, closed his eyes in concentration, and faint starlight began to flow from his fingertips. He didn't use any spells but guided pure starlight magic, like a trickling stream, slowly seeping into every corner of the room, sensing and neutralizing the residual dark arts. Like foul auras. Hermione, on the other hand, waved her wand, dealing with the physical dust with the most basic cleaning spells. She did it meticulously, not missing a single corner. Creature, the house elf, had once sneaked over, wanting to see what the mudblood was ruining now, but Hermione sternly asked him to help wipe the windows. For Creature, who loved cleaning, this command, though from someone he despised, his instinct to clean still made him grumble while working diligently. A few days later, the room was completely transformed. Dust and cobwebs disappeared, and the floor and woodwork revealed their original colors. Though somewhat old, the walls were repeatedly reinforced by Hermione with strengthening charms and anti-eavesdropping charms, and the window panes were wiped crystal clear by Creature. In the center of the room was Lynn's simple laboratory bench brought from his apartment, covered with a silk cloth gifted by Lynn Li. Embroidered with basic arrays. Next to it were several sturdy tables Hermione had rescued from the House of Black library, pieced together into a large desk, piled high with various books, Hogwarts textbooks, tracing the origins of ancient protective magic borrowed from the library, the several profound scrolls of elementary explanations of Eastern array arts on silk left by Lynn Li, and Lynn's own notes on star magic. Most importantly, at the 4 corners and the center point of the room, Lynn had outlined 5 profound runes with special magic ink mixed with moonstone powder. They formed the simplest 5-directional starlight stabilization array, derived from Lynn Li's material, but reinterpreted by Lynn with starlight magic. When night fell, and starlight streamed through the north window, these runes would glow faintly, continuously absorbing and transforming star power, maintaining the purity and stability of the magical energy within the room. This became their starlight workshop. Their research was not isolated. Lupin and Sirius would often bring practical situations encountered by the Order of the Phoenix during their operations, types of curses commonly used by Death Eaters, energy fluctuation characteristics of dark arts marks, and even samples of magical residue from corrupted locations. "We need a way to quickly identify dark arts marks, preferably remotely and without alerting the target," Lupin suggested during one sample delivery. His face was more tired than a few days ago. "Currently, identification relies entirely on Snape's information and experience, which is too passive and too dangerous." Hermione immediately buried herself in books. The discussions on energy sensing and key identification in Eastern array formations gave her inspiration. Lynn, meanwhile, tried to integrate the unique purifying and resonating properties of starlight magic into it. In the evening a few days later, inside the workshop, Hermione was carefully engraving a modified sensing rune onto a thin jade tablet, her brows furrowed, the tip of her wand concentrating highly focused magic, guiding the carving tool. Lynn, on the other hand, was adjusting a simple device composed of a brass stand, a crystal lens, and a star-shaped magnet. He called it a starlight resonance meter. Attempting to use it to amplify and capture specific frequencies of dark arts fluctuations. "The frequency is still unstable." Lynn adjusted the angle of the magnet, frowning slightly. "The fluctuations are too weak, and it's easily interfered with by other magic. Try using this as a guide." Hermione didn't even look up, pushing a parchment with a complex energy guiding circuit drawn on it towards him. "Eastern array formations emphasize intention follows key movement. Perhaps your starlight magic doesn't need to be forcibly amplified, but should, like water, naturally seek out and permeate the gaps in those dark energies." Lynn took the sketch, and with just one glance, his eyes flashed with sudden enlightenment. "That makes sense. I was too fixated on detection itself, ignoring the natural flow of energy." He immediately picked up his tools and began to modify the crude instrument. Hermione then looked up, rubbing her somewhat sore eyes, and gazed at Lynn, who was focused on his work. His profile was exceptionally clear in the workshop's unique light, a mix of starlight and magic lamp glow, his eyes focused, his fingers nimble and steady as she watched. A faint, unconscious smile touched her lips. After a while, Lynn seemed to hit a bottleneck and subconsciously reached for the water glass beside him, but found nothing. A cup of warm tea, emitting a faint, calming floral fragrance, was gently placed by his hand. Lynn paused, looked up, and met Hermione's smiling gaze. "Take a break," Hermione said softly, her tone filled with undeniable concern. "You've been fiddling with it all afternoon. Madame Pomfrey would surely tie you up with bandages if she knew you were so careless with your newly recovered body." Lynn looked at her feigned seriousness and couldn't help but smile, gracefully taking the teacup, his fingertips brushing hers unintentionally. Both paused slightly, then naturally separated, an unspoken warmth quietly passing through the air. He took a sip of tea. The temperature was just right, and the floral scent was refreshing. "Thank you," he said softly, his gaze gentle. "It's nothing." Hermione turned her head slightly, her ears feeling a little warm. To hide it, she picked up Lynn's recently modified drawing. "Here, can the design of the energy reflux node be optimized further? If we refer to the 7 stars aligned array formation, perhaps it could reduce magic loss." She immediately immersed herself in academic discussion again. Lynn smiled, put down his teacup, and leaned over to study with her. Their heads were very close, their breaths intermingling, as they debated, verified, sometimes falling into contemplation, and sometimes exchanging a smile due to a breakthrough idea. There were no ambiguous words, no deliberate intimacy, but under a common goal. In this incredibly tacit cooperation, a deeper connection and dependence quietly grew. Every clash of ideas, every silent support, fostered their feelings more than any sweet words could. Outside the window, London's night deepened, and starlight streamed through the glass, gently falling upon this busy yet tranquil little world, draping a hazy and beautiful silver veil over the faintly glowing runes, the intricate instruments, and the two people working side by side. Their research might still have a long way to go before success, but this summer, in this old house steeped in historical shadows, the room named Starlight Workshop was quietly becoming their initial fortress against the darkness, and also the most cherished and warm sanctuary for 2 young hearts before the storm arrived. Chapter 153 Parents' Questions. Mornings at number 12, Grimwald Place often began in the kitchen. Molly Weasley was always the first to wake, rousing the entire house with clanking pots and sizzling bacon. The aroma of food stubbornly combated the inherent mustiness of the old house, bringing a comforting scent of home. Hermione woke exceptionally early today. She sat at a long table, absently poking a fried egg with her fork, her gaze frequently drifting towards the old-fashioned telephone in the corner of the living room. It looked out of place in this wizard family, like some intruding Muggle antique, but Mr. Weasley had specifically installed it for her and Harry to contact their Muggle relatives and friends. Lynn sat down beside her, holding a mug of milk. Keenly sensing her unease, he followed her gaze to the telephone, understanding immediately. "Thinking of calling your parents?" he asked softly, gently pushing the warm milk towards her hand. Hermione snapped out of her thoughts, sighed softly, and nodded, her brow habitually furrowed. "Yes, it's been almost 2 weeks since summer vacation started, and I've only sent them one letter, saying I'm doing a research project at a friend's house." Her voice carried clear guilt and unease. They must think it's strange I never used to go this long without calling them." She forked the fried egg but didn't put it in her mouth, just stared at it unconsciously. "And, with everything that's happened recently, I feel like I can't keep them completely in the dark. Even if I can't explain too clearly, at least I should warn them, so they can be prepared." Lynn remained silent for a moment, understanding he knew Hermione's worries. Lord Voldemort's return, the treacherous state of the wizarding world, no one could guarantee that the conflict wouldn't somehow affect unsuspecting Muggles, especially the families of important wizards. Such a warning was necessary and responsible, but explaining it to parents who had no understanding of the magic world without causing them excessive panic was indeed a challenge. "Do you want me to stay with you?" he asked softly, offering no excessive comfort, just the most practical support. Hermione hesitated, then finally shook her head, though her eyes had warmed considerably. "Thank you, Lynn, but I want to talk to them myself first. Some things might be easier to say that way." She paused, her voice even lower. If I need backup, will you come over then?" "Of course." Lynn nodded, saying no more, simply accompanying her quietly through breakfast, conveying silent support with his eyes. After breakfast, Hermione took a deep breath, as if preparing for battle, and walked towards the telephone. She picked up the receiver and dialed the number she knew by heart. A long beep, beep, sounded in the receiver, Each sound tapping on her heart. Lynn didn't leave the dining room. Instead, he picked up a copy of the Daily Prophet, pretending to read. But his attention was entirely focused on the living room. He could hear Hermione starting the call in as cheerful a voice as possible. "Hi, Mom. It's me. I'm fine, really. The project is a bit complicated, but very interesting. Yes, staying at a friend's house, it's very convenient." Her voice gradually became more natural as she inquired about her parents' health, the dental practice's business, and what movies they had seen recently. The casual small talk temporarily dispelled the worry from her brow, but gradually, her tone underwent subtle changes, taking on a hint of imperceptible seriousness. "Where's Dad?" "Oh, it's fine if he's nearby. Actually, there's something I wanted to tell you both." Her voice dropped, and Lynn had to listen very carefully to hear her. It's just this field we've been researching recently. Well, it's a bit niche, and there are some debates in academia, quite intense ones." She chose words that were as vague and muddle understandable as possible. It's possible that a small number of people with extreme views might engage in some overly aggressive behavior. It's not very common, but Professor advises us all to be careful." A questioning sound seemed to come from the other end of the phone, and Hermione's tone became a little urgent, but she tried to remain calm. "No, it's not a problem with our project. It's a problem with the whole wider environment. It's like certain extremist political groups or fanatical scientific cults. Do you understand?" "Yes, that kind of feeling." She paused, seemingly listening to her parents speak, her fingers unconsciously twirling the telephone cord. "So, I wanted to say, could you both also be a little careful recently, okay?" Her voice took on a pleading tone. "If you encounter anyone particularly strange, or receive any odd letters or packages from unknown sources, please don't be curious, stay far away, and call me immediately, or call the police. Yes, trust me, this is very important." She emphasized some daily safety details, such as locking doors and windows at night, being careful in unfamiliar places, and even subtly suggested they consider taking a short vacation soon. "I know this sounds a bit inexplicable, Mom." Her voice lowered, carrying a hint of barely concealed exhaustion and worry, "but please trust me this one time, okay? Just consider it, for my peace of mind while I do my research here. I'm really worried about you." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone, followed by Hermione's mother's gentle but clearly puzzled reply. Hermione listened intently, occasionally murmuring and finally, with a sense of relief mixed with a touch of sadness, she said, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad. I love you. I'll come back to see you when my project here is finished." "Okay, goodbye." The call ended. Hermione didn't turn around immediately. She held the receiver, her head bowed, her shoulders slightly slumped, her back conveying the exhaustion of a heavy burden lifted. Lynn put down his newspaper and walked behind her, saying nothing, just gently placing his hand on her shoulder. Hermione turned, gently resting her forehead against his chest, her voice muffled. "They agreed, but I don't think they fully understood. They just didn't want me to worry." Her tone was filled with helplessness and guilt. "They understood the most important part." Lynn gently embraced her, his voice steady and reassuring, "which is that their daughter is worried about them. And this worry is very important. That's enough. They will be more vigilant." He paused, then added, "And this is just the beginning. In the future, we can continue to remind them in more subtle ways. Perhaps we can even research if there are any magic methods that can provide them with some remote protection without violating the international statute of secrecy." He recalled Hermione's reluctant act of modifying her parents' memories in the original timeline and resolved to find a better way. Hermione nodded gently in his arms, drawing warmth and reassurance from him. After a while, she looked up, her eyes a little red, but her gaze had become firm again. She sniffled, "You're right, this is just the first step. Next, we have to work even harder." Her gaze involuntarily drifted towards the fourth floor, in the direction of the Starlight Workshop, where their unfinished research lay, where their hope of fighting darkness and protecting their loved ones resided. Lynn followed her gaze, smiled slightly, and took her hand. "Come on, researcher, we still have many topics to tackle." Sunlight streamed through the high windows, cutting several columns of light through the dust-filled air. The telephone receiver in the living room hung quietly on its hook, as if the cross-world call, full of hidden worries and concern, had never happened. But some seeds had been sown, some worries had been conveyed in the coming storm. This bond of family spanning the magic and muggle worlds, and the determination of the two young wizards to protect it, might become another unexpected and resilient line of defense. Chapter 154 Nightmare Whispers. The nights at number 12, Grimwald Place were not always peaceful. The old house would often emit faint creaking sounds in the silence, as if shadows of the past were still whispering within its walls. But for some, it wasn't the house's noises that bothered them, but rather disturbances from a deeper, darker realm. In recent days, Harry's condition had noticeably worsened. The dark circles under his eyes grew heavier, he often zoned out during meals, and he would even jump at the jarring scrape of a knife across a plate. Didn't sleep well again, Ron mumbled, chewing bacon at breakfast one day, looking worriedly as Harry nearly knocked over his milk cup again. Harry rubbed his temples, his gaze a little unfocused. Yet, always having nightmares. Still, that dream. Hermione put down her spoon, lowering her voice slightly. She knew Harry hadn't been sleeping well since returning from the graveyard. Harry nodded, his face even paler. Pretty much, but it's been clearer lately. It's always a long corridor, with a door at the end. I really want to open that door, there's a strong urge in my heart, but I'm also very scared. I feel like there's something terrifying behind the door. He described it simply, but his hands on the table unconsciously clenched, his knuckles white. It could be post-traumatic stress, Hermione tried to explain with knowledge she'd read in books. You know whose resurrection caused too much trauma for you, plus Cedric. She trailed off, not finishing her sentence. Harry forced a smile, saying nothing more, but everyone could see he was preoccupied. This state intensified at night sometimes. Ron, who slept next to Harry, would be woken by his muffled cries or violent movements on the bed. It was late again. Lynn and Hermione were still in the Starlight workshop on the 4th floor. Hermione was trying to engrave the core rune of a small protective array onto a silver coin, referencing the silk manuscript Ling Zingao had left behind. Lynn, meanwhile, was on the other side, calibrating his Starlight resonance meter, attempting to increase its sensitivity to faint dark fluctuations. Suddenly, the crystal at the center of the instrument, serving as its sensing core, began to hum faintly without warning, and a very subtle, ominous gray-black ripple appeared on its surface, but vanished in an instant. Lynn's movements abruptly stopped, his brows furrowing instantly almost simultaneously. An extremely faint but chillingly cold and distorted magical fluctuation, like ripples caused by a stone dropped into a calm lake, came from somewhere downstairs, gently brushing against his perception. This fluctuation was extremely subtle, yet it carried a sickening familiarity, cold, viscous, filled with greedy longing and pure malice. It was essentially of the same origin as the fluctuation from the suspected Horcrux, the remnants of Riddle's diary, that Professor Dumbledore had carefully sealed for research, but it was more active, more hungry. What's wrong? Hermione immediately noticed his abnormality, looking up and asking. She couldn't see the fluctuation, but she could feel the instant tightening of Lynn's magic and the sharpening of his gaze. Lynn didn't answer immediately. He closed his eyes, his entire mind immersed in the fleeting remnants of the fluctuation. Starlight magic slowly circulated within him, diligently capturing and analyzing that lingering resonance. The direction the fluctuation came from seemed to be the 2nd floor, the location of Harry and Ron's room. A few seconds later, he sharply opened his eyes, his expression grave. Just now, there was a very strange dark fluctuation coming from downstairs. He looked at Hermione, his voice very low, very faint, but its essence is extremely evil. It feels very similar to that thing Professor Dumbledore showed us. Hermione's face instantly paled. She immediately understood Lynn's hint. You mean, a Horcrux? Just saying the word sent a chill down her spine. Can't be entirely sure, but it feels very close. Lynn's gaze turned towards the door, as if he could see through layers of floorboards to the 2nd floor. And the direction of the fluctuation is towards Harry's room. The atmosphere in the workshop suddenly became heavy. Harry's recent nightmares, his description of the corridor and the door, and this sudden dark fluctuation, these fragments pieced together pointed to an unsettling possibility. Harry said he always dreams of a door. Hermione's voice trembled slightly. Could it be that it's not just a simple nightmare? Could it be that something is influencing him? The thought sent shivers down her spine. She instinctively moved a step closer to Lynn, as if to gain more security. Lynn reached out and gently held her cool fingers, starlight magic slowly transmitting a calming power. It's possible, he said in a deep voice, his eyes sharp. If Lord Voldemort made multiple Horcruxes, and one of them just happened to form some kind of connection with Harry, or is right here nearby. He didn't finish, but Hermione already understood his meaning. If a Horcrux was in the old Black family house, or had established a link with Harry in some way, then Harry's recent abnormalities and this eerie fluctuation had a terrifying explanation. We must tell Professor Dumbledore, Hermione said urgently. Of course, Lynn nodded. First thing tomorrow morning, we'll send a message via Patronus. But now, he paused, Feeling that the fluctuation had completely disappeared, leaving only the pure starlight energy in the workshop and the warmth of Hermione's palm. The fluctuation has disappeared. Perhaps it was just a brief manifestation. He looked down at Hermione's still pale face, softening his tone. Don't worry too much, maybe it's just a false alarm. Harry has Professor Dumbledore's protection, and he himself is very strong. Even so, a shadow fell over both their hearts. The appearance of a Horcrux meant that Lord Voldemort's shadow was closer and more pervasive than they had imagined. Hermione took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. She gripped Lynn's hand back tightly, as if drawing courage from his steady strength and warmth. She nodded, her eyes becoming firm again. Whatever it is, together, we'll always find a way. Their subsequent work seemed to take on a sense of urgency. They continued to research, but the conversation unconsciously drifted towards how to strengthen defenses, and how to more effectively detect and shield against dark energy. It wasn't until late at night that the two left the workshop. The corridor was pitch black, with only the faint streetlight from outside the window filtering in, casting long shadows on the floor. The old house seemed quieter than usual, every shadow seemingly harboring the unknown. Reaching Hermione's room door, she was assigned next to Ginny's room. Lynn stopped. Lock your door tonight, he instructed softly, his tone serious. If anything feels wrong, call me loudly immediately, or use the two-way mirror. Hermione looked at his silhouette outlined by the dim light, and the fear she had felt from the recent discovery was gradually replaced by a sense of solid security. She knew he was not far away. You too, she responded softly. Don't stay up too late researching that fluctuation. We still need to tell Professor Dumbledore tomorrow. Okay. Lynn nodded. The two stood silently at the door for a few seconds, neither turning to leave immediately. A silent understanding and concern flowed in the air. Finally, Hermione rose slightly on her tiptoes, quickly kissed him lightly on the cheek, then swiftly turned and pushed open her room door, leaving only a soft goodnight before the door gently closed. Lynn was momentarily stunned, his fingertips unconsciously touching the spot that had just been kissed. A soft touch and the faint scent of books seemed to linger there. A hint of a smile dispelled the gravity in his eyes, and also warmed this night shrouded in dark suspicions. He stood at the door until he heard the faint click of the lock turning inside, then turned and walked to his own room. The corridor fell silent again, but for Harry, troubled by nightmares, and for Lynn and Hermione, whose internal alarms blared after sensing the ominous fluctuation. This night was destined to be long. Lord Voldemort's shadow was quietly infiltrating this newly established temporary haven in an unexpected way. Chapter 155 The Ladder of Trust. The morning, as always, began in the kitchen. But today, besides the usual aroma of food, there was an unmistakable tension at the dining table. Harry had been woken by nightmares again last night, and the strange fluctuation Lynn had sensed, like an invisible veil, hung over the hearts of those in the know. At breakfast, Harry looked even worse than in previous days, almost mechanically shoveling food into his mouth. Hermione and Lynn exchanged a worried glance but didn't ask further. At the table after the meal, as Molly began directing the twins and Ron for another round of deep cleaning, Remus gently called out to Lynn and Hermione, who were about to go upstairs. Lynn, Hermione, he said with a smile, but with a subtle seriousness in his eyes, if you're free, could you come to the study for a moment? There's some information that might need your help to look over. Hermione's eyes immediately lit up, with a certain expectation of being needed. Lynn, on the other hand, nodded calmly. The study was more cramped and old-fashioned than the living room, but relatively tidy. Sirius was leaning lazily against an old desk, flipping through a stack of parchment. Seeing them enter, he waved casually. Don't be nervous, I'm not sending you to catch dark wizards. Sirius grinned, trying to lighten the mood. Just some boring paperwork. Remus took several files from a disk drawer. They looked like copies of Ministry of Magic archive documents, but the content wasn't official reports. It was more like handwritten observation records and scattered intelligence summaries, with varying handwriting, some even using codes. We've received some information from different sources, Remus explained, lowering his voice slightly, about some suspicious activities. Abnormal procurement records from certain shops in Nocturne Alley, reports of magical traces around certain marked family residences, and some vague sightings of missing magical creatures. These things are too fragmented for official channels to bother with, but for us, any clue might be useful. He pushed the files towards them. We need someone to help with initial screening and classification, to identify which might be signs of Death Eater or sympathizer activity, and which are just ordinary black market dealings or accidents. This requires high demands on memory, logical analysis skills, and magical knowledge. He looked at Hermione, his tone filled with genuine admiration. "We believe no one is better suited for this job than Hogwarts' most outstanding witch." Hermione's cheeks flushed slightly with excitement and a sense of responsibility. She immediately took the files, her gaze becoming incredibly focused. "I understand. I'll cross-reference and analyze by location, time, activity type, and potential correlation. As for you, Lynn," Remus turned to him, a hint of inquiry in his gaze. "Remus and I mentioned that you're sensitive to a certain special energy fluctuation." He cleverly avoided specific terms like star magic and Horcrux fluctuations. Lynn nodded, not denying it. "Under certain conditions, I can sense some anomalies. We've recently been trying to reinforce the protective magic of the old house and a few safe houses," Sirius interjected. He pointed his wand at several faint, ancient runes on the study wall. "Some spells are too old, their effects have weakened, and they need new magic infused or adjustments. But the Black family's ancient magic is somewhat exclusive, reacting poorly to ordinary strengthening charms." He shrugged. "Remus thinks your, well, rather special magic might more easily soothe or integrate into these old magical structures, making the reinforcement work smoother. Of course, this requires very precise control and must not forcibly damage the original protection." This was a test, and also an initial sign of trust. Giving them access to non-core but valuable work was both an acknowledgement of their abilities and a way to observe them further. "I'm willing to try," Lynn replied concisely and affirmingly so. For the next few days, the study and the Starlight Workshop on the 4th floor became their temporary mission center. Hermione was completely engrossed in intelligence analysis. She had somehow acquired a large magical map of London and the surrounding areas, which she spread on the study floor, using different colored thumbtacks and strings to mark and connect the scattered information. She rapidly consulted various reference books, from modern dark magic marks to illegal uses of common magical materials, constantly recording, classifying, proposing hypotheses, and then refuting them herself. Her focused, slightly furrowed brow while working made even Molly, who occasionally came in to bring refreshments, tiptoe around. Remus and Sirius would periodically check on her progress, expressing surprise and admiration for the clear patterns she had deciphered and several insightful conjectures she had made. "Merlin's beard, Hermione," Sirius exclaimed, looking at the several highlighted, potentially related areas on the map. "You connect the dots better than Alastair, Mad-Eye. He relies more on experience and intuition, but you're practically charting Death Eater's potential activity patterns." Hermione just smiled shyly and immediately plunged back into her work, the feeling of being needed and recognized greatly satisfying her sense of worth. Lynn's work was more practical. Accompanied by Sirius, he carefully inspected several key protective nodes of the old house. Those ancient magics were indeed stubborn, full of resistance to other magic. Lynn did not forcefully attack them, but rather, as Hermione had previously suggested, guided a faint starlight magic, like a stream seeping into soil, slowly integrating into the ancient runic structures, gently stimulating their original power, or making subtle reinforcements and adjustments without destroying the whole. The process required immense patience and control, and after several attempts, even with Lynn's magical reserves, he felt somewhat fatigued. But the effects were significant. Several runes that had been dim now became stable and bright again, and the overall protective aura of the old house seemed to thicken slightly once, while reinforcing a malicious sensing rune on the main door. Lynn's magical output fluctuated slightly, causing the rune to flicker unstably. Sirius, standing nearby, immediately tense up. "Be careful. This thing is temperamental. If you mess up, it could trigger a reverse alarm." But Lynn quickly adjusted his breathing, and the starlight magic became as fine and soft as spider silk, gently soothing the agitated magical structure, quickly restoring its calm, and even making it more sensitive than before. Sirius sighed in relief, gave a silent whistle, and looked at Lynn with genuine admiration. "Impressive. When I was little, I tried to study this thing and almost blew the door off. My mother grounded me for a whole week. Outside of work, their time alone became even more precious. It was often in the Starlight Workshop late at night, or during brief breaks." "How is it? Have you found any patterns?" Lynn handed Hermione a cup of hot cocoa after she finished a round of analysis. Hermione took the cup, warming her hands, her eyes bright with thought. "There are some vague indications. The procurement records from Borgin and Burke's in Nocturne Alley are very suspicious, and several cases of missing magical creatures all occurred near the Weald, where there are reportedly several abandoned pure-blood family estates. But more evidence is needed." She sighed, rubbing her brow. There's still too little information. That's already good progress, Lynn comforted her, naturally reaching out to massage her temples, his fingertips providing soothing warmth. It's much clearer than when you first spread out the map. Hermione comfortably narrowed her eyes, like a cat being petted, and leaned gently against his hand. I hope this helps them. Another evening, Lynn had just finished reinforcing a protective node, his face a little pale. Hermione immediately noticed and, without a word, pulled him back to the Starlight Workshop, forcing him to rest. Your magical fluctuations aren't completely stable yet. You can't overexert yourself like this, she said with rare firmness, handing him a potion to restore magic. Drink this. Next time, let Black do more himself. He's the master. He should be more familiar with these things. Lynn looked at her face, which was particularly serious with worry, and couldn't help but smile, obediently drinking the potion. Okay, I'll listen to you. The potion didn't taste good. He winced slightly. Hermione saw his expression, a hint of a smile in her eyes, and as if by magic, pulled out a small piece of chocolate from her pocket and quickly popped it into his mouth. Eat something sweet, it'll make you feel better. Her fingertips brushed his lips inadvertently, and both of them froze for a moment. A hint of sweetness melted on his tongue, sweetening all the way to his heart. The Starlight Workshop was quiet, with only the faint hum of instruments. They looked at each other, the air filled with a subtle mix of the potion's bitterness, the chocolate's sweetness, and a faint budding affection. By completing these seemingly simple but crucial tasks, Lynn and Hermione were gradually earning more trust from the core members of the Order of the Phoenix. They were no longer students who needed complete protection, but were slowly becoming preparatory members who could share the burden and contribute strength in this process. They supported each other and relied on each other. Every unspoken understanding, every worried glance, every silent gesture of care, deepened their bond little by little, making the feelings that had blossomed in adversity, like the protective magic quietly reinforced in the old house, grow tougher and more stable. Night fell again, and number 12. Grimwald Place stood silently in the darkness, like a fortress quietly awakening. And within it, different forms of guardianship were silently taking place in every corner, accumulating strength to face the unknown storm. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 156 Special Topic. Days passed with a peculiar rhythm, part the dull routine of an old house, part the secret comings and goings of the Order of the Phoenix members, and part Lynn and Hermione's increasingly in-depth research in the fourth-floor workshop. Their analysis of intelligence and reinforcement of the old house's defenses seemed to be recognized. Lupin and Sirius looked at them with an appreciation that was now tinged with genuine reliance. However, the news about Harry's nightmares and the strange fluctuations that night, once conveyed to Dumbledore, was like a stone sinking into the sea, receiving no immediate response. This brief calm, instead, made them even more uneasy this afternoon. That calm was broken. Dumbledore arrived suddenly. He didn't use the flu network, but appeared silently in the living room as if parading, his silver-white hair and half-moon spectacles still conspicuous in the dim light. His arrival startled both Hermione, who was checking map information, and Lynn, who had just finished debugging an instrument. Professor, they both stood up almost simultaneously. Good afternoon, Hermione, Lynn. Dumbledore smiled, but there wasn't much amusement in his blue eyes. Instead, they held a deep solemnity. I hope I haven't interrupted any important work you might be doing. If it's convenient, perhaps we could find a quiet place to talk. His gaze swept meaningfully in the direction of the fourth floor. A moment later, the three stood in the Starlight Workshop. The Starlight magic array here was running well, and the air was fresh and stable, completely different from the dull and oppressive atmosphere of the old house downstairs. Dumbledore observed the runes in the center of the room and the instruments that combined Eastern and Western characteristics with interest, lingering for a moment particularly on Lynn's Starlight Resonance Meter. A very interesting and reassuring space, he commented, his gaze finally resting on Lynn and Hermione. I received your message about Harry's dream, and the fluctuation Lynn perceived. His tone became serious. Firstly, you both did very well, extremely vigilant and responsible. Your discovery confirms some of my recent concerns. He paced slowly, his voice low and clear. Lord Voldemort did indeed create more than one Horcrux. And, as you suspected, There might be a certain dark link beyond distance between him and some Horcruxes, and between Horcruxes themselves. This link might be able to influence or even transmit some information, especially to those who have a particularly special connection to it. He didn't explicitly state Harry's special relationship with the Horcrux, but the hint was clear enough. Harry's nightmares are very likely not accidental, but a manifestation of this dark link attempting to infiltrate his mind. Dumbledore's gaze swept over their shocked faces. And the fluctuation Lynn perceived is very likely the evil energy leaked from a Horcrux when its link was briefly activated. This conclusion made the temperature in the workshop seem to drop a few degrees. Hermione instinctively clenched her fists, and Lynn's eyes became incredibly sharp. Then what should we do? Hermione asked eagerly. Can we cut off this link? Or at least, shield it, protect Harry? That's precisely why I came to you today. Dumbledore stopped pacing, turned to face them directly, his gaze more focused than ever. Conventional magic has little effect on this dark link that originates from the deepest part of the soul. Forcibly severing it could even lead to unpredictable repercussions. We need a new approach, a completely different kind of power. His gaze fell on Lynn, or more precisely, on the unique starlight magic within him. Lynn, the star magic you wield, its essence is purification, resonance, and protection. It is fundamentally almost completely opposite to the dark arts that Lord Voldemort relies on, that splits the soul in pursuit of immortality. And Hermione, your profound understanding of magic principles, your rapid learning ability, and the unique life link between the two of you, provide more possibilities for the application of this power. He leaned forward slightly, his tone solemn as he entrusted them with a task. Therefore, I hope to give you what might be our most important, and most difficult, research assignment at present, to explore whether star magic has the potential to interfere with, or even temporarily shield, this dark link between dark arts marks and Horcruxes. The workshop fell silent, with only the faint hum of the starlight magic array's runes. The significance of this task was too great, and too arduous. This was no longer simple analysis or reinforcement, but directly pointed to the core of Lord Voldemort's secret to immortality. We need a method, Dumbledore continued, his voice low but full of power, perhaps not to completely destroy the link, but if we can interfere when he exerts influence through the link, or provide a temporary shielding protection for the link person, that will gain us a crucial advantage in future struggles, and may even save lives. He looked at the two young wizards. I know this is a high demand, and may even be full of unknown dangers. You have the right to refuse. We accept. Lynn barely hesitated, his voice calm yet firm. He felt not only a sense of responsibility but also a deep necessity, to protect Harry, to oppose that cold darkness. Hermione took a deep breath, her eyes also becoming incredibly resolute. She stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Lynn. Yes, Professor. We will definitely do our best. Dumbledore looked at them, and finally, a genuine smile and a hint of imperceptible relief appeared in his eyes. Excellent. I knew entrusting this task to you was the right choice. He didn't stay long, leaving a few words of advice about safety first and contacting him via portrait if anything is needed, then departed as quietly as he had arrived. The workshop was once again left with just the two of them. The air seemed to still hold the lingering resonance of their recent heavy conversation. Hermione turned to Lynn, her brow habitually furrowed again, but her eyes burned with the fierce fire of research. We need a plan. First, we need to thoroughly understand the energy composition of the dark arts mark and the Horcrux link. I remember there were scattered mentions in Secrets of the Darkest Art, but that's certainly not enough. Perhaps we can start by analyzing the residual fluctuations you perceived. She immediately went to the desk, grabbed a quill and parchment, and began to quickly list possible books to consult and experimental steps. Entering her focused know-it-all mode, Lynn didn't join her immediately. He just watched her quietly, watching her side profile glow with concentration. Watching her boundless fighting spirit instantly erupt for a nearly impossible task. He knew in his heart that this path was destined to be fraught with difficulties, and might even be futile. But watching her, feeling the starlight magic within him subtly resonating with her, a strange confidence and warmth slowly rose. He walked to her side, not looking at the parchment, but gently taking her hand that was busily writing. Hermione's quill paused, and she looked up, a little surprised. Lynn, there's no rush for this moment, he said softly, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand, feeling the slight warmth of her fingertips from writing so hard. This is a long-term project. We need to start more systematically from the beginning. His voice was steady, carrying a reassuring strength, and we don't need one person to go through all the. We'll do it together. Hermione looked at her reflection in his eyes, at the determination and support in his gaze, and the urgency born of pressure slowly subsided. She turned her hand to clasp his, with considerable force, as if confirming each other's presence. She nodded, a slight smile playing on her lips, a weary but incredibly warm smile. Together, sunlight through the north window stretched their figures, standing side by side, casting long shadows on the workbench covered with diagrams and books. The air was filled with the scent of old paper, magic ink, and the tension brought by the new task, but in their tightly clasped hands, what was conveyed was not only the determination to face the challenge together, but also an unspoken trust and reliance. The path ahead was shrouded in mist and fraught with danger, but at least for now, in this small workshop guarded by starlight, they had each other, and were preparing to join hands, with wisdom and tacit understanding, to leverage that seemingly indestructible cornerstone of darkness. Chapter 157 A Glimmer of Light in the Haze. The task Dumbledore assigned was like a heavy boulder thrown into water, creating ripples in the starlight workshop. Hermione immediately entered a state of neglecting sleep and food. After efficiently wrapping up her previous intelligence analysis work, she devoted all her energy to the theoretical research of dark arts marks and Horcrux links. The gloomy yet richly stocked library of the House of Black Old Mansion became her most frequent haunt besides the workshop. Lynn, on the other hand, focused more on practical exploration. He constantly adjusted the starlight resonance meter, trying to make it not only detect dark fluctuations but also analyze their frequency and composition at the same time. He began to try to guide starlight magic to simulate various barriers or interference fields of different properties, testing their effects on the simulated faint dark arts traces within the workshop, mainly from the remnants of some purified dark arts items. Progress was slow, and there were frequent setbacks. The purifying effect of starlight magic on dark energy was significant, but how to precisely apply this effect to an intangible, formless, and potentially long-distance soul link was a completely new challenge. This afternoon, a faint smell of scorching permeated the workshop. An uncontrolled output of starlight magic had burned out an amethyst used to simulate link conduction. Hermione coughed a few times, choked, and looked up from a pile of open ancient books, her face showing fatigue and frustration. Still no good, Lynn sighed, waving his wand to clear away the crystal residue. The energy output is either too strong, causing the carrier to collapse, or too weak to form effective interference at all. The simulation of distance and medium is also too idealized. Hermione put down her quill and rubbed her throbbing temples. Theoretical breakthroughs are also hard to find. All dark arts involving souls and permanent links are the highest taboos. There's almost no public information. I can only look for inspiration from some ancient protective magic and counter spells for contract magic. Just then, an unusual commotion came from downstairs. Mr. Weasley's raised voice was mixed with Kingsley Shacklebolt's low and urgent report, and Sirius's impatient rebuttal. The two exchanged glances. Seeing vigilance in each other's eyes, they put down their work and hurried down the stairs. The atmosphere in the living room was tense. Mr. Weasley's face was grim. Kingsley was as calm as ever, but his eyes were sharp. Sirius paced restlessly, like a trapped beast in a cage. Is it confirmed? Molly Weasley's voice trembled, her hands gripping her apron tightly. Mostly certain. Kingsley's voice was steady but undeniable. Within the past 48 hours, the same wandering wizards appeared at the east and west entrances of the square, staying for an unusually long time, and showing excessive attention to individuals entering and exiting the old mansion area. Although well disguised, their behavior patterns and reactions to specific magical fluctuations, referring to the protective charms activated when Order of the Phoenix members entered and exited, matched the characteristics of Death Eater reconnaissance scouts. They found us. Ron's voice was filled with alarm. He, Harry, and Ginny stood at the bottom of the stairs, having clearly heard everything. Not necessarily. Lupin came from the direction of the kitchen, still holding a dishcloth. Apparently having just helped clean. It's more likely suspicion and surveillance. Grimwald Place has ancient family magic protection. They cannot determine the exact location, nor can they easily break through, but this surveillance itself means danger is approaching. We can't just sit here and do nothing. Sirius stopped abruptly, anger burning in his gray eyes. We must give them a taste of their own medicine and let them know this isn't a place they can spy on. Reckless action will play right into their hands. Sirius, Mr. Weasley countered, they might be hoping we expose more, so we just hide here and wait for them to gather more people, or find a way to break through the defenses. Amidst the argument, Lynn and Hermione quietly moved to the side. Hermione's face was a little pale, and she instinctively moved closer to Lynn. The Death Eater's surveillance brought the abstract threat to their doorstep, making them genuinely feel a suffocating pressure. Lynn gently squeezed her hand and whispered, "Don't be afraid, the protection is still very strong." His gaze, however, turned to the gloomy sky outside the window, his mind racing Death Eater surveillance. This might be an opportunity to test their preliminary research results in a relatively controllable environment, not for a high-level goal like a Horcrux link, but a more practical one, interfering with dark arts tracking or screening in the evening. An opportunity unexpectedly arose. The Order of the Phoenix needed to send an urgent batch of supplies, mainly any essence and stimulating drafts, to another safe house, and the usual escort personnel were temporarily unavailable. The delivery route would briefly pass through a potentially monitored area. "I'll go." Fred, or George, immediately raised his hand, an eager expression on his face. "No, it's too dangerous." Molly immediately objected. "Perhaps we could try." Lynn suddenly spoke, drawing everyone's attention. He and Hermione exchanged glances, seeing determination in each other's eyes. "We have a preliminary idea," Hermione interjected, her voice slightly raised from nervousness, but clear and articulate. "A protective method based on the principle of energy concealment, which might temporarily interfere with their tracking magic or screening spells. This delivery route isn't long, and the risk is relatively controllable, so it's perfect for on-site testing." The living room fell silent. Lupin and Sirius exchanged a look. "What kind of protection?" Kingsley asked calmly. He was an expert in practical combat. Lynn briefly explained their idea. Using starlight magic to construct a temporary, constantly fluctuating energy membrane around the target, similar to the principle of a Muggle stealth aircraft coating, not completely invisible, but distorting and scattering most of the signals from detection magic. Theoretically feasible, but the actual effect, Lupin mused. "We need to know if it works," Lynn said frankly, "and I'll go with them to ensure safety." Finally, after careful evaluation and repeated admonitions, this bold proposal was approved. The plan was for Lynn and George. It was ultimately decided to be him because his apparition was more skilled, to execute the delivery mission together, while Hermione stayed in the old mansion, maintaining contact via the two-way mirror and monitoring the starlight resonance meter for any abnormal fluctuations. Night fell, and a light drizzle began to fall over London. The door of number 12, Grimwald Place, was carefully opened a crack, and Lynn and George, cloaked in an invisibility cloak, silently merged into the night and the rain. Hermione stood by the north window of the workshop, clutching the slightly warm two-way mirror, her heart pounding. She could vaguely sense Lynn's location and general state through the contract. Tense, but steady. Time passed minute by minute. Every second felt exceptionally long. Only the faint hum of instruments and the sound of rain outside the window filled the workshop. Suddenly, the two-way mirror in her hand vibrated, and George's hushed voice came through, with a hint of excitement. "There's a reaction, just now. A magical fluctuation clearly swept over us around that corner, but it slid off like it hit greasy glass. Your boyfriend's Bible seems to work." Almost simultaneously, the crystal core of the starlight resonance meter flickered slightly, indicating that it had captured a brief external detection magic fluctuation, but its intensity was greatly attenuated. Hermione let out a long sigh, realizing she had been holding her breath. 10 minutes later, the mission was successfully completed. Lynn and George returned safely, their invisibility cloak damp with rain. But both their faces showed the exhilaration of success. The effect was even better than expected, George reported eagerly as soon as he entered. At least 2 clear detections were interfered with. "If it weren't for testing, we could have passed by completely unnoticed." Lynn looked a bit tired, but his eyes were bright. He met Hermione's concerned gaze and nodded slightly. This small-scale success was like a glimmer of light, piercing through the gloom that had enveloped the old mansion. Due to the Death Eater's surveillance, it proved that their research direction was feasible, and their efforts were not in vain. That evening, while summarizing the test data in the workshop, Hermione looked at the significantly attenuated fluctuation curve on the recorder and couldn't help but break into her first genuine, relaxed smile in days. "We've taken the first step," she said softly, her voice filled with a sense of accomplishment. Lynn stood beside her, looking at the still gloomy night sky and fine rain outside the window, his gaze seeming to penetrate the mist. "Yes, the first step," he repeated, his voice steady, "but this proves that even darkness cannot completely devour the starlight." He reached out his hand, and Hermione naturally took it. Both their palms were slightly sweaty from the tension just now and the joy of the moment, but they held on exceptionally tight. They had not only successfully conducted a live test, but had also further solidified their belief that they were the best partners in their shared challenge. The road ahead was still dark, but at least they had personally lit the first lamp. Chapter 158 Spark Contract. The summer night wind, carrying London's unique scent of river water and old bricks, swept across the flat rooftop terrace of number 12, Grimwald Place. This was a spot Sirius had only recently cleaned out, moving mountains of old furniture and bird droppings, making it a rare breathing space in the gloomy old house. The night sky wasn't entirely clear, thin clouds drifted like gauze, but stubborn starlight still pierced through, interweaving with the city's hazy lights below, forming a unique halo. Suspended between magic and reality, Lynn and Hermione sat side by side on the reinforced low wall at the edge of the terrace. Behind them lay the ancient, sleeping house, and before them, the sprawling city lights. The evening breeze ruffled Hermione's slightly curled hair, also dispelling the fatigue and tension from the day's research. Several days had passed since the successful small-scale test that interfered with the Death Eater's surveillance. Subsequent monitoring indicated that their reconnaissance efforts seemed to have weakened, perhaps realizing that the defenses here were more formidable than imagined. This bought them a moment of respite, making this night exceptionally peaceful. Neither of them spoke, simply gazing up at the star power. The star array in the workshop was a pure force guided by humans, while the real, boundless star power above their heads carried a primal, awe-inspiring power. Sometimes it feels like everything is a dream, Hermione suddenly said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice seemed a little ethereal in the night wind. Before I met you, I was still anxious about exams. Lynn turned his head, looking at her profile illuminated by the star power, and didn't interrupt. Then, you appeared, Hermione continued, a hint of disbelief in her tone. With completely different magic, knowing so many secrets, and, she paused, her voice dropping, and the strange, wonderful pact between us. She turned to look at Lynn, her brown eyes exceptionally bright in the night. Fighting side by side in the Chamber of Secrets, the thrilling Goblet of Fire, escaping death in the graveyard, and now, hiding in this old house full of historical shadows, researching how to fight the most terrifying dark wizard in the world. She gently shook her head, a complex smile playing on her lips. The experiences of this time are more insane than all my past put together. Lynn listened quietly, sensing the ripples beneath her words. For a girl who grew up in the relatively stable Muggle world, believing in rules and logic, this series of drastic changes indeed require time to process. Do you regret it? He asked softly, his gaze profound. Hermione barely hesitated, shaking her head resolutely. No. Not at all. Her gaze returned to the star power, her tone becoming steady and firm. If I had to do it again, I would still choose to walk into the girls' lavatory with a troll, I would still choose to trust you, and I would still sign that pact. She paused, her voice imbued with an unprecedented tenderness. Because all of this made me realize that magic isn't just knowledge and spells from books, it's also responsibility, protection, and connection. Her fingertips unconsciously touched her chest, where the invisible link of the pact existed, and it made me meet you. Her last sentence was spoken so softly it almost merged with a wind, but Lynn clearly caught it. A warm current surged in his heart. He reached out and gently covered her hand, resting on her lap. Her hand was cool, but his palm was warm. For me, all of this is the real miracle. Lynn's voice was low and clear, carrying an undeniable sincerity. Crossing the boundaries of time, arriving in this familiar yet strange world, I thought it would be a lonely journey. Until I met that girl in the library, frowning and full of questions about unreasonable magic phenomena. He squeezed her hand slightly. It's you who made this world real to me, made it worth protecting with everything I have. Your courage, your wisdom, your persistence, even the way your nose wrinkles when you're serious, these are the most precious gifts I never expected. His words lacked flowery language, yet they touched Hermione's heart more than any love confession. She felt her cheeks flush, fortunately concealed by the night. She didn't pull her hand away, instead, she turned her palm and intertwined her fingers with his. Palms pressed together, warmth and strength passed silently between them. Professor Dumbledore said the task is very difficult, right? Hermione leaned her head gently on his shoulder, gazing at the brightest star in the night sky. Interfering with a Horcrux's link, it sounds almost impossible. Lynn felt the weight of her leaning against him, his heart at peace. But it's not without hope. Star power and darkness are inherently opposing forces. And he turned his head, his chin gently brushing the top of her head. Together, we can always create unexpected miracles. Just like that time we interfered with the surveillance. He paused, his tone becoming even more resolute, as if making a solemn vow. No matter how many hardships and obstacles the future holds, no matter how dark Lord Voldemort's shadow is, I will be by your side. We will learn together, fight together, and protect everyone and everything worth protecting. Hermione looked up, meeting his deep eyes, which reflected the star power and her own image. An indescribable sense of reassurance and courage surged through her body from their clasped hands and close connection. "Me too," she responded clearly, her gaze burning like the most steadfast star in the night sky. "No matter what happens, we face it together. Your world, your battle, is mine. We will find a way to destroy those Horcruxes and end this darkness." This was not the impulsive, passionate vow of teenagers, but a clear and firm choice made by two souls who had endured trials of life and death, deeply understanding each other and their responsibilities. Their feelings had long transcended simple affection, merging into a common ideal, shared battles, and a bond of life. The night wind blew, rustling their clothes and hair. In the distance, the faint wail of Muggle sirens could be heard, further accentuating the tranquility and resolve of this corner of the terrace. They stopped talking, simply leaning against each other, gazing at the star power. The vast universe seemed to witness this small yet shining vow. With the star power as witness, and life as their pact, they would walk hand in hand until the darkness dissipated and dawn arrived. On this summer night, on the rooftop terrace of the House of Black, an old house symbolizing past darkness and prejudice, new hope, like a spark, was quietly ignited. Though faint, it contained a tenacious power capable of spreading like wildfire. And their next journey, the grand chapter of Phoenix Overture and the Shadow of Horcrux, was about to slowly unfold in this glimmer of starlight. Chapter 159 Dark Clouds. The kitchen at number 12, Grimwald Place, was enveloped in the stifling late summer air and an even heavier atmosphere. A lavish breakfast prepared by Molly Weasley, fried eggs, bacon, grilled tomatoes, and a mountain of toast, was laid out on the long table, but those seated around it seemed to have little appetite. The Daily Prophet was roughly splayed in the center of the table, like an ominous stain. The front page headline screamed in exaggerated font, "Dumbledore and the Savior, a power play behind the lies, exclusive investigation. Why is the Hogwarts principal insisting on spreading panic?" The article went to great lengths to slander Dumbledore, portraying him as a schemer who, to seize the position of Minister for Magic, would exploit Harry Potter to fabricate the lie of you-know-who's return. Harry, in turn, was described as a mentally unstable and attention-seeking troubled youth, his testimony regarding Cedric Diggory's death contemptuously dismissed as post-traumatic fantasy. According to reliable sources within the Ministry of Magic, Dumbledore and his followers, including some Order of the Phoenix members, are secretly training underage wizards for their ulterior motives. This act of involving children in personal ambition has sparked widespread concern. "Nonsense," Ron's face flushed with anger as he snatched the newspaper, wishing he could tear it to shreds. "How can they? They clearly know, but they choose not to believe." "Ronald," Mr. Weasley sighed wearily, his face etched with deep worry. He had returned from the Ministry of Magic very late last night, and the dark circles under his eyes showed he had spent a sleepless night. Fudge and his cronies, they fear the truth far more than they fear Lord Voldemort himself. There's hardly any room for dissenting voices in the Ministry now. Harry stared at the food on his plate, his lips pressed into a pale line. His hands, resting under the table, were tightly clenched, his fingernails digging into his palms. These malicious accusations were like cold needles, repeatedly pricking at the wounds that had not yet healed from the grief of losing his godfather. Hermione sat next to Harry, her face equally grim. She didn't look at the report but instead gazed at Harry with concern, then instinctively turned her eyes to Lynn, who sat opposite her. Lynn's expression was relatively calm, but a layer of frost seemed to congeal in his dark eyes. He reached out and took the crumpled newspaper from Ron's hand, quickly scanning the malicious words, his gaze lingering particularly on the section about training underage wizards. "They are building momentum for their next move." Lynn's voice was not loud, but it clearly reached everyone's ears, slandering Dumbledore and Harry, branding the Order of the Phoenix as a dangerous organization. "Next, they are likely to take more direct control over Hogwarts." His words made the atmosphere at the dinner table even heavier. Even the usually lively twins, Fred and George, were silent, exchanging a serious look. "Albus has foreseen this," a voice came from the doorway. Remus Lupin walked in, his face bearing his usual gentleness, but his eyes were sharp. "He warned us that Hogwarts would not be peaceful this semester. We need to be prepared." "Prepared? How prepared?" Sirius irritably poked his plate with a fork. "Are we just going to watch that pink toad extend her claws into Hogwarts?" His tone was filled with undisguised disgust when he mentioned Umbridge. "Calm down, Sirius." Lupin pressed his hand on his old friend's shoulder. "Impulsiveness won't solve problems, especially you." He gave Sirius a meaningful look. "You absolutely cannot leave here easily now. Sirius snorted resentfully but knew that Lupin was speaking the truth. As a fugitive of particular interest to the Ministry of Magic, even one step out of Grimmauld Place could lead to disastrous consequences for him. Breakfast ended in a suffocating silence. Harry was the first to push back his chair and leave the kitchen. His back rigid. Ron hesitated for a moment, then followed him. Ginny watched their direction with concern, and Mrs. Molly began distractedly clearing the dishes, the clinking of plates sounding particularly jarring in the quiet. Hermione gently touched Lynn's arm, gesturing upstairs with her eyes. Lynn understood, and the two left the stifling kitchen one after another, returning to their starlight workshop on the 4th floor, which had been converted from an old bedroom. The workshop still maintained a constant comfortable temperature and a pure magic environment, a stark contrast to the stuffiness and oppression downstairs. But at this moment, even here, a heaviness seemed to permeate, carried up from downstairs. Hermione closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a long breath, her face filled with anxiety and anger. How dare they do this? Twisting black into white. Professor Dumbledore and Harry, they almost died in the graveyard. Cedric, her voice choked, unable to continue. Lynn walked up to her, not speaking immediately, but simply reached out and gently held her cool fingers. Starlight magic, with its soothing warmth, slowly flowed through like a gentle stream. Fear makes people foolish and ugly, Hermione, he whispered, his gaze calm. Fudge is afraid of losing power, so he chooses to build a false haven, treating everyone who points out danger as an enemy. This is not uncommon in history, but this is too unfair. Hermione looked up, her brown eyes flashing with anger and grievance. Harry has endured so much, and now he has to be misunderstood and ridiculed by the whole world. We know the truth. Lynn squeezed her hand, his tone firm. Members of the Order of the Phoenix know, and some people, like your parents, who have been kindly warned, will also be vigilant. The truth may be temporarily hidden, but it will not disappear forever. He led her to the window, looking out at the gray sky, segmented by tall buildings. Remember what we said on the rooftop, no matter how they sugarcoat the piece, darkness is indeed approaching. Our task hasn't changed. In fact, it's become more urgent because of their foolishness. Hermione followed his gaze, feeling the firm strength in her palm, and her intensely fluctuating emotions gradually calmed down. Yes, anger would not solve the problem. What they needed was a clearer mind and more thorough preparation. Lynn. She turned to face him, her eyes once again clear and focused. You said they are building momentum to control Hogwarts. If Umbridge really goes to Hogwarts and implements her rubbish education, what should we do? What should Harry do? Lynn looked at Hermione, who had quickly broken free from her emotions and was now thinking about countermeasures, and a warm current of pride and tenderness welled up in his heart. He reached out and tucked a stray curl of her hair behind her ear, his fingertips accidentally brushing her warm earlobe. The stronger the suppression, the easier the spark of resistance is ignited. He curved his lips slightly, a curve that held a hint of coolness and confidence. If she dares to come, if she tries to stifle true knowledge, to imprison the minds of young wizards, then someone will always find a way to transmit true power where she cannot see it. His words were profound, and Hermione immediately grasped his hint, her eyes widening slightly, then flashing with a glimmer of understanding and determination. But that would be very dangerous. She instinctively lowered her voice. That's why we need a more meticulous plan, more reliable companions, and Lynn's gaze fell on the faintly glowing runes and instruments in the center of the workshop. More unique and effective methods. Our research might play an unexpected role in such an environment. He lowered his head, gently resting his forehead against hers, his voice becoming soft yet full of power. Remember our vow? We face it together this time. It's no exception. Outside the workshop window, the London sky remained gloomy, thick clouds obscuring the sunlight. But in this small space, guarded by starlight and belief, two young hearts pressed tightly together had already dispelled the outside gloom, igniting the first unwavering glimmer for the approaching storm. Hermione closed her eyes, feeling the close breath and the firm reliance, and nodded gently. The storm was coming, but they were no longer alone. Chapter 160 Judgment and Branding. In the study at number 12, Grimmauld Place, the air seemed to solidify. The clock on the mantelpiece ominously pointed to under judgment. Hours earlier, Harry had been accompanied by Mr. Weasley and Professor Lupin to the Ministry of Magic via the Flu Network, to attend the hearing regarding his use of the Patronus charm in front of Muggles. Hermione paced back and forth in the study, her footsteps almost wearing a path into the carpet. She clutched the smooth two-way mirror tightly in her hand, her fingertips white from the pressure. Ron slouched in an old velvet armchair, his eyes fixed on the closed door, as if he could see what was happening far away at the Ministry of Magic. Lynn stood relatively calmly by the window, gazing out at the gray street, but the lines of his profile were taut, revealing his inner turmoil. He knew the plot, knew that Harry would ultimately be acquitted, but being personally caught in this anxious wait, and knowing that this was merely the beginning of a larger storm, prevented him from truly relaxing. "Why is it taking so long?" Hermione couldn't help but stop, her voice trembling slightly. What if something went wrong? What if Umbridge played another trick? "The Department of Magical Law Enforcement has strict procedures, Hermione," Professor Lupin tried to reassure her, but his constantly rubbing his wand betrayed his own tension. "Arthur and Dumbledore are both there. They will ensure the trial proceeds fairly." "Fairly?" Sirius scoffed. He had been in an explosive state since breakfast. Talk about fairness under Fudge's nose? "I bet they'd love to find an excuse to snap Harry's wand." His words made the atmosphere even more oppressive. Just then, the two-way mirror in Hermione's hand suddenly grew warm, and the surface rippled like water. "It's Harry," Hermione gasped, almost pouncing on the desk to set down the two-way mirror. Ron and Sirius immediately crowded around. Lynn quickly walked to Hermione's side, placing a hand gently on her slightly trembling shoulder. The mirror surface rippled a few times, but Harry's image didn't appear. Instead, his hushed voice came through, accompanied by a faint echo in a hollow room, as if he were hiding in a corner. "Hermione? Ron? Can you hear me?" "We can hear you." "Harry, how did it go?" Hermione eagerly spoke into the mirror. "It just ended." Harry's voice sounded tired but held in excitement of having escaped a close call. I'm innocent." They dropped all charges. A collective sigh of relief filled the study. Ron slumped back into his chair, covering his face. "Merlin socks, that's wonderful." "I knew it." Hermione's voice was tearful, her shoulders finally relaxing, and she unconsciously leaned towards Lynn beside her, but Harry's tone suddenly became grave. "The process was awful. That Umbridge, she was right there on the judgment panel, like a pink toad, staring at me with a disgusting, sickly sweet gaze. And Fudge, he didn't want to hear any explanations, he just wanted to convict me." He paused, his voice tinged with lingering fear and anger. "If Professor Dumbledore hadn't suddenly appeared, he testified for me, refuted all the charges, I might have been." The fragmented information from the mirror was enough for everyone in the study to imagine the thrilling intensity of that trial. Fudge's aggression, Umbridge's insidious nature, Dumbledore's powerful intervention. "It's good that you're all right, Harry," Lynn said, his steady voice carrying through the two-way mirror. "The outcome is what matters most." "They didn't succeed." "Lynn's right," Hermione quickly chimed in. "You're safe now, that's the key." Harry's voice became a little calmer. "Mr. Weasley and Professor Lupin are taking me out. I feel like Fudge's face was as ugly as if he'd swallowed a whole bucket of slugs. Umbridge," she smiled at me, that kind of smile, it sent shivers down my spine. "I don't think this is over." His premonition coincided with what Lynn knew. This trial, rather than being an end, was more of a declaration, announcing the complete publicization of the war between the Ministry of Magic and Dumbledore. "And Harry, don't think about it too much for now, Harry," Hermione tried to make her voice sound optimistic. "Just get back safely. We're waiting for you." The communication ended. The two-way mirror returned to its cold, smooth appearance. A brief silence fell in the study, although the good news brought a moment of relief. Harry's last words hung like a dark cloud, settling over them once more. "That old bat," Sirius slammed his fist on the desk, making the inkwell jump. "And that pink monster. If they dare touch a hair on Harry's head, Sirius," Professor Lupin interrupted him sternly. "What you need now is calm. Anger solves nothing and will only make you do irrational things, which is exactly what they want." Hermione did not join their argument. She slowly straightened up and turned to Lynn, her face etched with deep worry. "Lynn, Harry's feeling is right, isn't it? Umbridge won't give up. This trial failed, so she will definitely try other ways." Lynn looked into Hermione's anxious eyes and nodded. His hand on her shoulder tightened slightly, conveying silent support. "Yes. The trial was only the first round. Next, her battlefield will naturally shift to Hogwarts." His gaze swept across the angry Sirius, the weary Professor Lupin, and the shaken Ron in the study, finally returning to Hermione's face, his voice low and clear. "There are the people she most wants to control, and the ideas she most wants to stifle. And we are there." Hermione met his gaze, seeing in his eyes the same determination as her own, and that unique calmness, as if he could foresee parts of the future. This gradually settled her frantic heart. She took a deep breath, her eyes becoming resolute once more. Then we need to be even more prepared, she said softly, as if speaking to Lynn and also to herself. Hogwarts is our school, we can't let her do whatever she wants. The wait for Harry's return seemed exceptionally long. When green flames finally erupted in the fireplace and the figures of Harry, Mr. Weasley, and Professor Lupin appeared, everyone rushed towards them. Harry's face was still pale, but his eyes burned with a complex fire, a mixture of relief, anger, and determination. He briefly recounted the trial, especially how Dumbledore had defended him, and the ugly expressions on Fudge's and Umbridge's faces at the end. Professor Dumbledore said, Harry repeated, with a hint of awe in his voice, he believes I wasn't lying, and if the Ministry of Magic chose to focus its energy on pursuing real fugitives, he glanced at Sirius, instead of persecuting a 15-year-old student, the entire wizarding world would be safer. These words echoed like a declaration in the study at number 12, Grimmauld Place. The conflict had been fully brought into the open. With no room for retreat that night, Hermione found it difficult to sleep. She quietly went to the third-floor balcony and found Lynn already there, looking up at the night sky, reddened by the city lights. Can't sleep, Lynn heard footsteps and, without turning, asked softly, No. Hermione walked to his side, the night breeze rustling her nightgown. I just feel like something has changed. Before, I knew there was danger, but it seemed far away. Today, it feels like the door has truly opened. Lynn turned to face her. In the moonlight, her face seemed a little thin and fragile. He reached out and gently took her hand. The door has opened, he admitted, his voice exceptionally clear in the night. But what lies beyond the door won't just be darkness. He raised his other hand, and a very faint, silvery starlight swirled around his fingertips, flickering between them like fireflies. There's also us. He looked at her, his gaze burning. And there are others like us, who refuse to remain silent in the darkness. Hermione looked at the faint glow on his fingertips, then up at his resolute eyes. That unease gradually gave way to a stronger emotion. It was responsibility, courage, and the determination to stand shoulder to shoulder with the person beside her. She took a step forward and gently leaned into his embrace, resting her cheek against his warm chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. She closed her eyes and softly hummed in response. Under the night sky, two young figures embraced tightly, as if to resist the crushing weight of the entire world. The trial was over, but the real struggle had only just begun. And the chess piece named Hogwarts had already landed in the eye of the storm. Chapter 161 Pink Order. The Hogwarts Express, spewing steam, carried the students back to the ancient castle, but unlike the noisy and joyful atmosphere of previous school years, a subtle sense of oppression permeated the platform. This year students whispered to each other, their eyes occasionally glancing at the faculty seats, gossiping about the news in the Daily Prophet and speculating about the new school year. Hermione, Ron, and Lynn were squeezed into a compartment. Hermione had been poring over the Daily Prophet the entire journey, her brows furrowing deeper and deeper as the paper's lengthy articles continued to attack Dumbledore and Harry, their tone growing sharper with each piece. They even imply that Professor Dumbledore has mental problems, saying his lust for power has clouded his judgment. Hermione angrily slammed the newspaper onto the seat, her chest heaving. Let them say what they want. Harry watched the scenery flashing past the window with a sullen expression, his tone carrying a weariness and indifference unbefitting his age. No one will believe us anyway. Lynn did not participate in the discussion. He appeared to be resting with his eyes closed, but in reality, his mental power subtly spread out. Sensing the magic fluctuations inside and outside the train, he could detect several concealed, officially stamped detection spells sweeping through the train, which was clearly not Hogwarts' usual style. The Ministry of Magic's tendrils had indeed reached out at the welcoming feast. This sense of oppression reached its peak. The Great Hall was still sparkling with starlight, and the long tables were piled high with delicacies, but the conspicuous empty seat on the faculty table, Professor Dumbledore's seat, was like an invisible crack, tearing apart the usual harmony. And when Professor McGonagall routinely introduced the new professor, everyone's gaze focused on the figure who stood up. Dolores Umbridge wore an uncomfortable pink cardigan and a large, equally pink bow hairpin. She was short and plump, with a broad face and protruding, round eyes that made her look like a well-fed toad, a falsely sweet, cloying smile was plastered on her face, and she began to speak in a high-pitched, girlish voice. Ahem, thank you, Professor McGonagall. She cleared her throat a few times. Ahem, it's so lovely to see all your bright, eager little faces. Her opening speech was long and empty, full of bureaucratic jargon such as maintaining standards, avoiding risks, and magical practices suitable for modern society, but she never once mentioned the core of the course, defense against the dark arts, she repeatedly emphasized the Ministry of Magic's concern and guidance, as if Hogwarts were a kindergarten that needed strict supervision. Our aim is to eliminate, unstable practices, and to ensure that you are taught ministry approved, safe, and reliable theoretical knowledge. After all, in a properly ordered society, we don't need young witches and wizards to face those unpleasant things. Hermione's hands, resting on her lap, clenched into fists, her knuckles wide, her cheeks were flushed with anger, and her body leaned slightly forward, as if she would stand up and retort at any second. Lynn gently touched her hand under the table, shaking his head slightly at her. Now was not the time for impulsiveness. Umbridge's speech ended amidst a strange, sparse round of applause. Most students looked bewildered, and only a few Slytherin students clapped, Malfoy's face displaying undisguised mockery. The real disaster occurred the next day. In defense against the dark arts class, the classroom had been redecorated. The movable charts for demonstrating defensive spells that were originally on the walls were gone, replaced by pink bordered posters printed with tedious safety regulations. A cloyingly sweet perfume filled the air. Umbridge stood at the podium, still in her pink suit, smiling sweetly. "Good morning, class," she said in a high-pitched voice. "Please put away your wands in my class. A solid grasp of theoretical knowledge comes first. Practice will have to wait until you have fully understood and agreed to the basic rules." A wave of disappointed whispers rippled through the classroom. Hermione's eyes widened in disbelief. Umbridge began to make everyone read from her extremely dull textbook, titled Magical Defense Theory. The content of the book was stale and conservative, simplifying defense against the dark arts into a pile of definitions and clauses to be memorized, completely avoiding any spells that might pose actual danger. When Hermione finally couldn't resist and raised her hand to ask about practical application, especially how to defend against dark arts, the smile on Umbridge's face remained unchanged. But a cold glint flashed in her toad-like eyes. "My dear, what is your name?" "Hermione Granger, Professor, Miss Granger." Umbridge's voice was cloyingly sweet. "I believe you, or rather, certain people, may have been influenced by some misleading, alarmist rhetoric." Her gaze pointedly swept over Harry. "The Ministry of Magic can assure you that there is currently no evidence that you know who has returned. Therefore, learning spells that might provoke conflict is unnecessary, and even irresponsible. What you need to learn is how to become a law-abiding wizard who doesn't cause trouble for society." This twisted rhetoric made Hermione tremble with anger. She opened her mouth, wanting to argue further, but Lynn squeezed her hand hard under the table, stopping her. The subsequent lessons were even more absurd. Umbridge made everyone copy core concepts from the book and answer questions such as what should a law-abiding wizard do first when faced with potential danger. The correct answer was report to the relevant Ministry of Magic agency. Harry had a dark expression throughout, while Ron continuously rolled his eyes. Neville and others looked confused and disappointed. Lynn outwardly copied mechanically like everyone else, but most of his attention was focused on Umbridge. He silently released an extremely subtle wisp of starlight magic, like a tentacle, probing towards the pink figure on the podium. The magical fluctuations he sensed were peculiar. Umbridge's own magic was not particularly powerful, even somewhat impure and mixed, but she was enveloped in a thick shell composed of various official seals and contractual magic. This shell was filled with a rigid, stereotypical aura, possessing strong defensive properties, especially against detection and mind-influencing spells. This was consistent with her identity as a senior undersecretary at the Ministry of Magic. Her power came more from her position and rules than from her own magical prowess. At the same time, Lynn also keenly detected a subtle, cold, and cruel aura hidden beneath this shell, which was in stark contrast to the sweet hypocrisy she displayed. A rat in official papers, but with poisonous claws, Lynn coldly assessed in his mind. The moment the bell rang for the end of class, Hermione almost immediately packed her things and was the first to rush out of the classroom, her back stiff, clearly very angry. Lynn, Harry, and Ron followed her in the corridor. Hermione suddenly stopped, turned around, her brown eyes burning with fury. "Did you hear her? What rubbish was she talking about? No threat. No need for practice. She's practically burying our heads in the sand. When Lord Voldemort really comes knocking, are we supposed to fight him with her damned rules and regulations?" Her voice trembled with agitation. "We all know she's a liar, Hermione." Ron tried to comfort her, but it sounded hollow. "But that's useless," Hermione retorted vehemently. "What about the other students? They'll believe her. If this continues, our generation won't even know the most basic defensive spells." Harry's face was grim. He said nothing, Umbridge's words clearly stirring up his bad memories. Lynn waited until Hermione had calmed down a bit before speaking calmly. "Anger won't change the situation. Hermione, what she showed today is exactly the order the Ministry of Magic wants to impose, a false sense of security built on lies and ignorance. He looked at Hermione, his gaze deep, but an illusion is just an illusion. The harder it tries to suppress, the more the truth hidden beneath longs to break free. Hermione met his gaze, her heavy breathing gradually subsiding. She saw no anger in Lynn's eyes, only an all-knowing calmness and a faint hint of expectation. You mean? Hermione seemed to understand something, her voice lowering. Lynn didn't answer directly, just nodded slightly. Let's talk about it when we get back. They walked down the corridor towards Gryffindor Tower. Hermione still frowned, but her anger had gradually been replaced by a deep worry and contemplation. She occasionally looked at Lynn walking beside her. His steady pace and calm profile were like an anchor, making her realize that fighting Umbridge and the Ministry of Magic's lies required more than just angry shouts. The Pink Order had forcefully invaded Hogwarts, attempting to turn it into an intellectual desert. But beneath the desert, were there seeds brewing, waiting for their moment to break through the soil? Hermione didn't know the answer, but she knew she would never sit idly by, and she also believed that the person beside her had already seen much further. An unspoken understanding quietly flowed between the two of them. Chapter 162, Starlight Revelation. Hogwarts at night returned to its usual profundity and tranquility. The cold stone walls shut out the day's clamor and temporarily blocked out the suffocating pink haze. The Astronomy Tower, at the highest point of the castle, seemed to be closer to the starry sky, far removed from all earthly troubles. Hermione, clutching several thick tomes, practically rushed up the last few steps of the Astronomy Tower. The evening breeze ruffled her robe and somewhat dispersed a vexation in her heart. The top of the tower was empty, with only the massive brass telescope silently pointing towards the firmament, and the myriad of brilliant stars. She saw that Lynn was already waiting there. He stood with his back to her, leaning against a cold battlement, gazing up at the starry sky, his profile outlined calmly by the starlight. Just seeing his figure, Hermione's hurried breathing unconsciously slowed down a few beats. She walked over and placed a box on a nearby stone stool with a heavy thud. I can hardly believe it, she began, her voice still carrying the remnants of the day's anger. A whole day, in Transfiguration class, Professor McGonagall, though strict, at least taught us real things. Professor Flitwick in Charms class was as usual, but when it came to defense against the dark arts, she walked to Lynn's side and, mimicking him, leaned against the battlement. The cold touch made her shiver. That couldn't even be called a class, that was intellectual castration. She used a very harsh word, her chest heaving with agitation. She wants us to become a flock of obedient, thoughtless sheep. Lynn didn't respond immediately, still gazing at the starry sky. After a moment, he softly said, "Look over there, the 3 stars of Orion's belt are exceptionally clear today." Hermione paused, following his gaze. Indeed, the night sky was thick with stars, and those 3 bright stars aligned in a straight line were particularly striking. In Eastern astrology, they are called Shen, symbolizing warfare and military affairs. Lynn's voice was calm, as if telling an ancient story. Changes in celestial phenomena often presage disturbances in the human order. He turned his head to look at Hermione, the starlight illuminating his deep eyes. Umbridge's appearance is no accident. She is the embodiment of Fudge's fear, a pawn of the Ministry of Magic attempting to forcibly fit chaotic reality into a rigid framework. Her mission has never been to educate, but to maintain stability, a stability constructed from lies and ignorance. Hermione was stunned. Lynn's calm analysis was like a splash of cold water, extinguishing her pure anger and allowing her to see a deeper reason. "So, we can only endure?" she asked unwillingly, her voice dropping. "Watch her turn Hogwarts into what she wants it to be. Endurance does not equal submission." Lynn shook his head slightly. Direct confrontation is the least wise choice. She now holds educational decrees, representing the authority of the Ministry of Magic. Any open, direct opposition from us would easily be labeled violating school rules or challenging the ministry by her, and the result would only be our punishment, while she would gain more legitimate grounds to strengthen control. He pointed to the sky. Though faint, starlight can travel vast distances and illuminate darkness. Its power lies not on directly confronting darkness, but in its very existence, in its ability to guide direction. Hermione seemed to understand something, her eyes widening slightly. "You mean, we can't go head-to-head with her openly, but rather, in secret?" "Exactly." Lynn nodded approvingly. "She can control the classroom, but she cannot control the minds of all students, nor can she monitor every corner of the castle. The more she suppresses true knowledge, the greater the demand for those truly capable and courageous enough to impart it." A vague idea began to form in Hermione's mind. A place was needed, a place undiscovered by Umbridge and her cronies. A group of people was needed, a group unwilling to be deceived and eager to gain true power, and a teacher, or several teachers, were needed to guide everyone. But this is too risky. Hermione's rationality immediately began to analyze the difficulties. If we're discovered, any resistance comes with risk. Lynn took over her words, but compared to waiting to die, taking risks is worthwhile. Moreover, we are not unprepared. A trace of silver starlight quietly swirled around his fingertips, flowing like a living thing between his fingers. While our starlight workshop remains at Grimmauld Place, knowledge and ideas can be taken with us. We can incorporate some simple, beginner-friendly protective or disruptive techniques into basic defense against the dark arts spell instruction. More importantly, he looked at Hermione, his gaze filled with trust and encouragement. We need an organizer, someone who can unite people and plan meticulously. No one is more suitable than you, Hermione. Hermione's heart skipped a beat. Being so directly acknowledged and entrusted with such a heavy responsibility made her cheeks flush, but more than that, it was a sense of ignited responsibility. She remembered what Lynn had once said: the stronger the suppression, the easier the fire of resistance is ignited. We need an absolutely safe place. Hermione began to enter her most adept planning mode, her speech quickening. The room of requirement, it's the best choice. Then there are the candidates, not too many. They must be reliable. We can start with classmates who believe Harry and are dissatisfied with Umbridge. Watching her instant burst of enthusiasm and clear thinking, a subtle smile played on Lynn's lips. This was Hermione. Anger and frustration might temporarily trap her, but once she found direction and purpose, she would unleash astonishing energy. We can start with the very basics, Lynn added, such as the precise control of Expelliarmus, and the magic condensation techniques of Protego. I will help simplify the parts of star magic concerning energy guidance and perception to see if it can help them master it faster. That's great. Hermione excitedly turned to face him, her eyes sparkling in the starlight. This is like secretly lighting a lamp in the darkness. Though the light is faint, one after another, it will one day illuminate the entire castle. The night wind ruffled her long hair, and a few strands brushed Lynn's cheek, carrying a faint, pleasant scent of shampoo. They stood very close, clearly seeing the starlight reflected in each other's eyes and each other's shadows. Lynn reached out and gently took her wrist. The warmth from his fingertips made Hermione's heart skip a beat. But, Hermione, his tone became particularly solemn, we must be extremely careful once this begins. There's no turning back. You must promise me that at all times. You will put your own safety first. The plan must be thorough, and actions cautious. His concern was like a warm current, enveloping Hermione. She felt the warmth of his palm and his firm grip. Nodding heavily, I promise you we'll do it together. Together, Lynn repeated softly, releasing her hand, but the warm sensation seemed to linger on Hermione's wrist. The two fell silent again, gazing up at the starry sky side by side. The vast universe seemed like a silent witness, observing two young souls making a secret vow to resist injustice at the top of this ancient castle. The anger and helplessness of the day were now replaced by a firm determination. The Pink Order attempted to shroud Hogwarts, but in the shadows it could not reach. The seeds of starlight had already been sown. They would quietly grow, awaiting the day they would spread like wildfire. And for Hermione and Lynn, this shared secret endeavor also brought their hearts closer than ever before. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 163. The First Shackle. The mornings at Hogwarts were usually awakened by the flapping of owls' wings and the clatter of dishes in the Great Hall. But this morning, an unusual silence hung over the Gryffindor table. The reason was not absenteeism, but rather that almost everyone was staring intently at the Daily Prophet in front of them, or more precisely, at a parchment notice, written in official letterhead with pink frills, pinned above the newspaper's front page. The notice was magically magnified, ensuring that every word on it was visible from every corner of the Great Hall. The title was written in exaggerated, ornate script, Hogwarts High Inquisitor's Decree, Number 1. The spoon in Hermione's hand clattered into her cereal bowl, splashing milk. Oblivious, she rapidly scanned the cold, hard clauses, her lips moving silently, her face growing paler and paler, to ensure that the educational environment of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry complies with the latest standards set by the Ministry of Magic, and to maintain campus order, the following regulations are hereby issued. 1. Effective immediately, all student clubs, associations, groups, and any form of regular gathering of 3 or more students, excluding Quidditch team training, which must be reported in advance, must submit a written application to the High Inquisitor, Professor Dolores Umbridge, detailing the purpose of the gathering, activities, supervising teacher, and list of members. Any such gathering without the written approval of the High Inquisitor is illegal. 2. The High Inquisitor has the right to review, amend, or revoke approved gathering applications at any time, and has the right to attend any approved gathering to ensure its content complies with regulations. 3. Any student or individual found participating in or organizing illegal gatherings will face severe penalties including, but not limited to, detention, loss of points, suspension, or even expulsion. This decree takes effect from the date of its issuance. The decree was signed, Dolores Jane Umbridge, Hogwarts High Inquisitor. The silence lasted only a few seconds before being drowned out by an explosion of chatter. The Gryffindor table was in an uproar, and students from Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff exchanged bewildered glances, their faces filled with shock and dissatisfaction. Only from the Slytherin table came a few undisguised sneers and applause, Draco Malfoy's voice particularly grating. "Well done, Professor. It's about time these messy gatherings were reined in. She can't do this." Ron suddenly looked up, his face filled with incredulous anger. "What is this? Are they treating us like prisoners?" Harry's fists were clenched tightly, his nails digging deep into his palms. It was obvious who this ban was aimed at. Umbridge was clearly trying to completely stifle any potential force that might gather around Dumbledore, or Hermione suddenly stood up, her chest heaving, looking as if she was about to rush over and confront Umbridge. Lynn quickly grabbed the hem of her robe and firmly pressed her back onto the bench. "Calm down, Hermione." His voice was very low but exceptionally clear. "She's waiting for someone to jump out and oppose her, so she can make an example of them, but this is ridiculous. How can she forbid us from meeting privately? What about study groups? What about the chess club? This is simply," Hermione's voice trembled with anger, "because she now represents the will of the Ministry of Magic," Lynn calmly pointed out, his gaze sweeping over the pink notice, a hint of coldness flashing in his eyes. "This is the first shackles, intended to test our reaction while maximally restricting our freedom of action." Breakfast ended in a tense and angry atmosphere. As students gradually left the Great Hall, many were still indignantly discussing the absurd ban in the corridor leading to Transfiguration class. Fred and George Weasley joined Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Lynn. Unlike the anger of others, the twins had a mischievous glint in their eyes, mixed with excitement. "See the morning surprise, kids." Fred nudged George with his elbow, grinning. "What a thoughtful regulation." George mimicked Umbridge's high-pitched voice. "To maintain campus order, I think it's to maintain the authority of her pink suit. This is practically a declaration of war on us." Fred rubbed his hands, his eyes gleaming. "Forbid gatherings? Without approval? Who does she think she is?" "We're considering," George lowered his voice, a sly grin on his face, "developing some, portable covert communication devices, or anti-detection smoke bombs or something like that. We can't let her actually think we'll obediently comply, right?" Hermione frowned, instinctively wanting to say it was too dangerous, but she swallowed the words. In the current situation, any form of resistance seemed worth considering. Lynn, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. He looked at the twins, his tone calm but with a hint of interest. "Traditional concealment spells or soundproofing magic are easily broken by high-intensity detection magic, especially the Ministry of Magic standard equipment." Fred and George exchanged glances, both seeing curiosity in each other's eyes. "Oh? Do you have any brilliant ideas, Mr. Smartypants?" Fred asked, raising an eyebrow. Lynn didn't answer directly, but seemingly casually mentioned, "I remember, certain special magical materials, such as parchment treated with moon moss, or ink mixed with augury feathers, have a certain natural interference effect on standard detection magic. If combined with some non-standard magic circuit designs, perhaps it's possible to create communication cards or similar items that are harder to track." He paused, then added, "Also, sound transmission doesn't necessarily rely solely on air vibrations. Certain specific frequencies of magical fluctuations, over short distances, might be able to transmit simple information like ripples, and be harder to intercept by conventional means." The twins' eyes lit up instantly. Lynn's words opened a new world for them, no longer simple prank tools, but imbued with a certain technological confrontation. "Color, moon moss, augury feathers, magical ripples," George muttered to himself, his gaze distant, clearly already beginning to conceptualize in his mind. "Brilliant, Fred slapped Lynn on the shoulder. Lynn slightly frowned. "Thanks, mate. This idea is much more advanced than our original stink bomb cover." The twins ran off excitedly, clearly eager to experiment with these new ideas. Hermione watched their retreating backs, then turned to Lynn, her expression complex. "You're encouraging them to break school rules." "School rules are already being used to shackle thought, Hermione," Lynn calmly replied. "Sometimes, breaking unjust rules is a form of justice in itself." And, he looked at Hermione, his gaze deepening. "Fred and George's chaos can effectively attract the attention of Umbridge and her cronies. This can provide a layer of cover for what we truly want to do." Hermione immediately understood his hidden meaning, the idea of a secret gathering that had germinated in the Astronomy Tower. In the context of a complete ban, any gathering became extremely dangerous, but also more necessary. Fred and George's troublemaking in the open might become a protective umbrella for their actions in the shadows. Having understood this, Hermione's anger subsided slightly, replaced by a more complex, urgent determination. The first shackles had fallen, and the seeds of resistance had quietly broken through the soil in different places. She instinctively moved a step closer to Lynn, as if drawing strength from his steady presence. The road ahead was perilous, but at least they were not fighting alone. Chapter 164 Secret Invitation. Umbridge's first decree permeated the daily life of Hogwarts like a viscous oil-stained pink. Notices plastered in the corridors constantly reminded students of the shackles hanging over their heads. The classroom atmosphere became even more bizarre, especially in defense against the dark arts class. Umbridge seemed to revel in this sense of control. She still wore her pink suit, and with a sickly sweet voice, demanded everyone repeatedly copy the Ministry of Magic-approved safety theories, responding to any questions about practical application with a fake smile and the excuse of the time is not right. Her bulging toad-like eyes often scanned the classroom like searchlights. Catching any hint of dissatisfaction or doubt, Hermione was unusually silent in this class. She no longer raised her hand to ask questions, merely mechanically copying the useless regulations. But Lynn could see her knuckles, gripping her quill tightly, turning white from the effort, the tip almost piercing the parchment. It was an anger suppressed to the extreme. This suppression finally found an outlet after Charms class. Professor Flitwick had just explained and had everyone successfully practice the practical spell Swish and Flick, making the classroom atmosphere light and pleasant. As they walked out of the classroom, Hermione looked at the fleeting smiles on her classmates' faces, brought on by successful spellcasting, and an idea, like a flame ignited by a spell, suddenly flared in her mind. Quickly becoming clear and firm, she quickened her pace, grabbed Harry, who was about to discuss spell details with Seamus, and then gestured with her eyes to Ron, who was yawning. "Harry, Ron, wait a moment." Her voice was urgent and low. "There's something I absolutely must talk to you about. It's very important." Harry and Ron were both a little surprised, but seeing Hermione's unusually serious expression, they both nodded. Hermione's gaze then turned to Lynn, with an unspoken trust and inquiry in her eyes. Lynn nodded slightly, and quietly followed along. Hermione did not choose the noisy corridor or the common room where someone might overhear, but instead led them down a secluded side path lined with armor statues. The light here was dim, and few people passed by. "What's going on, Hermione?" Ron couldn't help but ask, rubbing his ears. "Professor Flitwick's class went pretty smoothly, didn't it?" Hermione took a deep breath, as if steeling herself, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her three companions in turn, finally settling on Harry. "Harry," she began, her voice very low, yet carrying an undeniable power, "do you remember the last task of the Triwizard Tournament, in the maze, and, in the graveyard, facing you-know-who?" Harry's face instantly darkened, a flash of pain and lingering fear in his green eyes. He pressed his lips together, nodded, and said nothing. That experience was a nightmare he still couldn't shake. "All of us saw it," Hermione continued, her voice growing agitated. "Saw Cedric, saw you-know-who revive. We know the danger is real, but now," she pointed to a pink notice vaguely visible at the end of the corridor, "now someone is telling us it was all fake, an illusion. They not only don't teach us how to protect ourselves, but they forbid us from learning." Ron's expression also became serious. "So what? What else can we do? That old hag Umbridge has blocked every path. Precisely because she has blocked every path, we must find our own." Hermione's voice carried a desperate resolve. "If the school won't teach, we'll learn ourselves. If she won't let us learn together, we'll learn in secret." Harry and Ron were both stunned, seemingly taken aback by Hermione's bold idea. You mean, form a study group?" Harry asked hesitantly, instinctively looking around, as if Umbridge might jump out from behind an armor at any moment. "Not just a study group," Hermione's speaking speed increased, her eyes sparkling. "It's an organization that can truly practice defensive spells. We need practice. We need dueling practice. We need to be prepared for the danger that might come, instead of just copying nonsense like do not use counter curses without authorization." Ron's mouth hung open. "But what about the decrees? If Umbridge finds out, so it must be secret." Hermione interrupted him, analyzing logically. "We need an absolutely safe place, and I thought of the room of requirement. It's almost impossible to find. Members must be strictly screened. Only those we completely trust and who genuinely want to learn. We can take turns on lookout, use some anti-detection tricks." As she said this, she instinctively glanced at Lynn. Lynn had been listening quietly, and only now slowly spoke. "This idea is very dangerous, but very necessary." His affirmation made Hermione breathe a sigh of relief. "But who'll teach?" Harry frowned. "Me? I can't." He lacked confidence in himself. "Of course it's you, Harry," Hermione said without hesitation, her tone full of trust. "You are the one with real combat experience. You've dealt with Dementors. Your performance in the maze, you even escaped from you-know-who. You understand how to use these spells in practice better than any of us." A struggling expression appeared on Harry's face. He was afraid of taking responsibility, afraid of implicating others because of himself. Hermione saw his hesitation, and her tone softened, but remained firm. "Harry, this isn't about showing off. It's for everyone's safety. Think about Cedric. If we had known more then, been better prepared, perhaps." She didn't finish. But everyone understood the implication. A silence enveloped this small corner. Harry lowered his head, his heart fiercely battling. Ron looked at Harry, then at Hermione, and finally mumbled, "It sounds exciting, but if we get caught, we'll definitely be expelled. If we do nothing, and the danger truly arrives, what we lose might be more than just our school enrollment." Lynn calmly stated a cruel fact. His words were like a stone thrown into Harry's heart, causing ripples. Harry finally looked up, his eyes still showing unease, but more so a kind of ignited sense of responsibility. He looked at Hermione's expectant face, then at Lynn's steady gaze, and even Ron's expression, which, though fearful, was eager. "All right." Harry took a deep breath, as if making up his mind. "I'll try, but we have to be very, very careful." Hermione's face instantly broke into a brilliant smile, as if all the gloom had been dispelled. "Of course, we will formulate the most meticulous plan." She excitedly turned to Lynn, her eyes sparkling. "Lynn, you'll help us, right? We need your knowledge, especially those different ways of thinking." She was referring to star magic and those anti-detection techniques. Lynn looked at Hermione's radiant face, invigorated by finding a direction forward, and his heart stirred slightly. He nodded, his tone gentle yet firm. "I will, whether it's teaching or safety, I will do my best." An indescribable excitement and a sense of close bond flowed between the four. They were planning a major act that violated school rules, a major act of defiance against authority, but behind this major act were immensely legitimate reasons and mutual trust. "We need a name." Ron also started to get involved, rubbing his hands together. "A code name. We can't let Umbridge know who we are." "How about Defense Association?" Hermione immediately suggested. "Abbreviated DA. It sounds very ordinary, but it has special meaning for us." "DA," Harry repeated, then nodded. "Okay." The secret invitations had been sent, and the spark of rebellion was officially ignited in this dim corner of the corridor. An organization that would cause Umbridge immense headaches in the future was quietly born. And when Hermione proposed this bold plan, the first look she sought for Lynn's support silently declared his irreplaceable position in her heart. The shared secret and the impending adventure drew the two young hearts closer. Chapter 165, Starlight in the Room of Requirement. Once the seed of a secret was sown, it quickly took root and sprouted in the soil of trust. Hermione's initiative was astonishing. In the following days, she acted like a cautious underground operative, quietly contacting Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley, Luna Lovegood, as well as Dean Thomas, Parvati Patil, and other classmates she deemed reliable and discontent with Umbridge's rule. The invitations were discreet, usually a whispered word when passing in the corridor, or a note passed between bookshelves in the library that read, "D.A. Interested." Most responses were positive and excited. The oppressive atmosphere of the school had long suffocated many students eager to learn real magic, and the DA's proposal was like a glimmer of light in the dark night, igniting hope in their hearts. At 8 o'clock on Friday evening, the appointed time arrived. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Lynn were the first to arrive on the 8th floor, in the secluded corridor with the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy being clubbed by trolls. Harry, following Hermione's instructions, walked back and forth 3 times in front of the blank wall opposite the tapestry, silently and intensely thinking, we need a place to practice magic. A place where we won't be discovered. As he walked past for the third time, a smooth, gleaming door silently appeared on the wall, as if it had always been there. It worked, Hermione whispered, her face beaming with joy and accomplishment. She pushed open the heavy wooden door, and the four of them stepped inside. The room of requirement responded to their needs in an unimaginable way. It was a spacious room, like a church hall, with ancient stone walls and high windows reflecting Hogwarts' starry night sky, perhaps a magical illusion. Thick, soft carpets covered the floor, enough to cushion the impact of a fall. At the far end of the room stood many bookshelves, crammed with books on defensive arts and dueling techniques. Even better, there were also piles of soft cushions and several dummies that looked like they were for practicing moving targets along the walls. Amazing, Ron exclaimed, looking around the magical chamber of secrets. Gradually, other invitees also slipped in, filled with nervousness and curiosity. Neville seemed a bit ill at ease, while Ginny's gaze was firm. Luna Lovegood, wearing her radish earrings, vaguely surveyed the room as if searching for experts. Dean, Seamus, Lavender, Parvati, and other Gryffindor students, along with Hufflepuff's Ernie Macmillan, Susan Bones, and others, also arrived, totaling about 20 people. They gathered together, talking in low voices. The air filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Harry stood in front of the crowd, facing a sea of expectant faces, feeling a nervous churning in his stomach. He cleared his throat, his voice a little dry. Thank you all for coming. We all know the current situation. Umbridge isn't teaching us anything useful, so I thought we could learn from each other and practice some really useful defensive spells. His opening speech wasn't brilliant, but it was sincere. Hermione looked at him encouragingly from the side. Just then, Lynn stepped forward, drawing everyone's attention. Instead of starting to explain spells as everyone expected, he quietly said to Harry, "Before we begin, perhaps we should help everyone stabilize their state. Nervousness and distractions can affect the concentration of magic." Harry was a little puzzled but still nodded. Lynn turned to the curious crowd and explained in a calm tone, "When practicing confrontational magic, inner peace and focus are as important as the spell itself. Excessive nervousness or excitement can make magic diffuse and difficult to control." He paused, then continued, "I've learned a somewhat Eastern meditation technique that can help quickly focus the mind and perceive the flow of one's own magic. If you don't mind, we can spend a few minutes trying it before we practice." This suggestion was a bit novel, but it sounded very reasonable. After everyone agreed, Luna had already found a cushion and sat down, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. Lynn gestured for everyone to sit in a loose circle on the carpet. He walked to the center of the circle, and without using his wand, he pressed his hands together in front of him, as if soothing an invisible current of air. He closed his eyes, and his breathing became slow and deep. Gradually, extremely faint, almost imperceptible silver specks of light began to appear around him, like tiny starlight in the night sky. These specks of light were not static. They slowly danced like fireflies with his breathing and spread outwards, lingering around each student sitting cross-legged. A very faint, pleasant hum, like distant wind chimes, seemed to resonate in the air. "Close your eyes." Lynn's voice was low and soothing, as if imbued with some magic. "Feel your breathing. Don't think, just feel the magic flowing naturally within you like a stream. Imagine yourselves under a serene starry sky." Hermione was the first to close her eyes. She trusted Lynn soon. Others followed suit at first. Some subtle fidgeting and strained breathing could still be heard, but gradually, as the miraculous silver specks of light and the pleasant hum continued to work, the atmosphere in the room subtly changed. Neville's tightly furrowed brow relaxed, and his perpetually tense shoulders loosened. Ginny's deliberately tough expression softened. Even Luna, who was always a bit distracted, showed a serene smile. Everyone felt an unprecedented sense of peace and focus, as if their inner distracting thoughts had been gently smoothed away. And the perception of their own magic became exceptionally clear. Harry was surprised to find that much of his nervousness about teaching had dissipated. His mind was clear, and he could even clearly feel the magic within him, surging gently and powerfully. After about 5 minutes, Lynn's voice sounded again, like a stone dropped into a calm lake, gently breaking the silence. "All right, slowly open your eyes and feel your current state." Everyone slowly opened their eyes, looking at each other, seeing surprise and disbelief in each other's eyes. They felt their minds clearer than ever, their spirits full, and their fingertips seemed to be filled with more obedient magic. "Merlin," Seamus Finnegan whispered to Dean. "I feel like I could cast 10 spells in a row without breaking a sweat." "That's amazing, Lynn," Hermione exclaimed sincerely, her eyes sparkling as she looked at Lynn. She felt it more deeply than the others because she could sense a harmonious resonance between the starlight magic Lynn guided and her own magic. Lynn smiled slightly, stepped aside, and nodded to Harry. Harry's confidence soared at this moment. He walked to the center of the area and drew his wand, so, his voice was much steadier and more powerful than before. We'll start with the basics. Expelliarmus, the disarming charm. It's one of the most practical and effective spells. The first DA meeting officially began in this wonderful tranquility and focus brought by the starlight. Harry found the teaching remarkably smooth, everyone learned quickly, and the spell's effects were surprisingly good. Red beams of light occasionally flashed in the room, accompanied by the thud of dummies being hit and falling, and cheers of success. Lynn did not participate in the specific spell instruction but observed with Hermione from the side, occasionally offering a suggestion or two on a student's casting motion or magical application. He watched the young wizards diligently practicing, saw the satisfied and hopeful smile on Hermione's face, and witnessed Harry gradually find his confident leadership posture, feeling a sense of peace in his heart. This meeting in the room of requirement not only lit the first lamp of resistance against Umbridge but also, in a unique way, brought together this group of like-minded companions, and the quietly falling starlight seemed to foreshadow that this hidden path, though in darkness, would have its own guiding light. Hermione quietly walked up to Lynn and whispered, "Thank you, Lindis, this is truly a perfect start." Lynn turned his head, met her smiling gaze, and softly replied, "It's our perfect start." Chapter 166 Silent Protest. The defense against the dark arts classroom now resembled a suffocating interrogation room. The pink decor and cloying scent of perfume could not mask its inherent coldness. Today, Umbridge's theoretical teaching finally touched upon the boundaries of defense, if it could even be called defense. She paced on the podium, saying in her shrill voice, "Therefore, when faced with potential conflict, the primary and only correct response for a well-educated, rule-abiding wizard is to seek help from an authoritative body, namely the Ministry of Magic's Magical Law Enforcement Squad. Any form of individual retaliation is reckless, dangerous, and not to be encouraged." Harry sat below, feeling his blood rush to his head. He remembered the Dementor, the Priory incanted him in the graveyard, and Sirius's figure as he fell through the veil. Seek help? When danger strikes in an instant, such an argument is tantamount to suicide. He couldn't help but blurt out, "So, when someone casts a killing curse at you, your advice is to raise your hand and report it, waiting to be killed." The classroom instantly fell silent. All the students held their breath, their gazes shifting between Harry and Umbridge. The fake smile on Umbridge's face froze, like a rigid mask. Her protruding, toad-like eyes stared fixedly at Harry, a cold and malicious glint in them. "Mr. Potter," her voice became even sweeter, yet sent shivers down one's spine, "am I to understand that you are openly advocating violence and questioning the Ministry of Magic's authority?" "I'm just stating facts," Harry declared, his green eyes burning with anger. "Some dangers don't give you time to write a report. We need to learn to protect ourselves, it seems." Umbridge slowly walked out from behind the podium and stood in front of Harry, her height only reaching his chest, but her presence exuded a condescending pressure. Certain deeply ingrained misconceptions need to be corrected. Clearly, merely copying theory is not enough. She pulled out a seemingly unremarkable roll of parchment and a black quill with an unusually sharp tip from her pink handbag. "Detention after class, Mr. Potter," she said sweetly. "Come to my office at 8 tonight. You need to deepen your understanding of the principle I must not use offensive magic without authorization." Hermione nervously gripped her robes beside him, an ominous premonition seizing her. She wanted to speak up for Harry, but Lynn gently pressed her arm under the table, shaking his head slightly at her. Any plea now would only add fuel to the fire. That night, Harry didn't return to the Gryffindor common room until almost curfew. His face was frighteningly pale, his right hand tightly clenched, and a trace of dark red, not yet dry, seemed visible between his fingers. He barely acknowledged Ron's barrage of questions, rushing straight up the stairs to the boys' dormitory. "Harry," Hermione called out worriedly, but Harry's figure had already disappeared. "What's wrong with him?" Ron asked Hermione and Lynn uneasily. Lynn's brow furrowed slightly. He sensed a very faint but twisted dark arts fluctuation lingering on Harry, and the scent of blood. "Things are bad," Lynn said in a low voice. "Umbridge used dark arts methods," Hermione gasped, her face instantly turning as white as Harry's. She immediately wanted to rush to the boys' dormitory to find out what happened, but she was stopped by the fat lady and the curfew rules. All night, she was restless, unable to read a single page of her books even after the last few students in the common room had gone to bed and the fireplace gradually dimmed. Hermione remained curled up in the widest armchair by the fireplace, her brows tightly furrowed, her eyes filled with anger and helplessness. Soft footsteps sounded. Lynn came down the spiral staircase from the boys' dormitory, dressed in dark pajamas with a robe casually draped over them. "How is he?" Hermione immediately stood up and asked eagerly. "His hand is badly injured, and he's in a bad state mentally, but Madame Pomfrey's ointment is helping a bit." Ron watched him fall asleep. Lynn walked up to her, his voice particularly clear in the silent common room. Umbridge forced him to write with a special quill. The tip would cut into the back of the user's hand, carving the words into the flesh. Hermione covered her mouth, tears instantly welling up in her eyes, both from heartache for Harry's pain and from the shock and anger at such a cruel method. How dare she? She's a professor. How can she use something like this, something like dark arts, to punish a student? In her eyes, this might just be a necessary means to deepen memory. Lynn's tone was cold. Power, once unrestrained, reveals its most hideous face. He looked at Hermione's shoulders, trembling slightly with anger and sadness, and reached out, gently holding her wrist. "Being angry won't help, Hermione. Let's first figure out a way to alleviate Harry's pain." Hermione looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. Lynn guided her to sit back down in the armchair, then knelt in front of her, meeting her gaze. "Give me your hand," he said softly. Hermione was a little confused but still obediently extended her right hand. Lynn didn't make any complex movements. He simply covered the back of Hermione's hand very gently with his warm palm. Immediately after, a gentle and pure energy, like a clear spring flowing under the moonlight, slowly transmitted from his palm. This wasn't a healing spell, Hermione could feel. It was more like a soothing and nourishment. The energy flowed through her arm, dispelling the chill of the night, and miraculously calming the churning anger and anxiety within her, bringing an inexpressible sense of tranquility and comfort. This feeling was like when Lynn guided everyone to calm their minds before every DA meeting, but now it was more focused, more intimate. "I can't directly heal Harry." Lynn's voice was low and gentle, particularly clear amidst the crackling of the fire. "Madame Pomfrey's ointment is more effective. But I thought, perhaps I could make you feel a little better. I can feel your emotions." Hermione was stunned, feeling the continuous warmth and calming power emanating from the back of her hand, looking at his close-up eyes filled with concern and tenderness. A strong warmth spread from the back of her hand, which he held, throughout her body, healing her inner anxiety more effectively than any spell. He was, in his own way, sharing her pain and soothing her emotions. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but this time it was no longer pure anger and sadness, but a mixture of infinite emotion and an indescribable feeling. She turned her hand and tightly gripped his, her fingertips trembling slightly. "Thank you, Lynn," she choked out, her voice as faint as a whisper. Lynn shook his head slightly, raising his other hand to gently wipe away the tear that was about to fall from the corner of her eye with his fingertip. His fingertips carried the cool touch of starlight magic, yet when they touched her skin, they evoked a strange warmth. "We are in this together, Hermione." He gazed into her eyes, repeating their previous vow. "Harry's pain is our pain too. But anger will only make us lose our judgment. We need to be calmer, smarter in fighting her." Hermione nodded vigorously, feeling the touch of his fingertips and the power of his words, her heart filled with an unprecedented sense of security. On this night full of oppression and danger, his presence, his understanding, his support, were like a strong bulwark, giving her the courage to face anything. The two of them stayed quietly by the dying fire, hand in hand, silently conveying strength and comfort. Outside, Hogwarts Castle was immersed in the night, the Pink Order temporarily receding, but the will to resist and the warmth of mutual support quietly grew in the silence, more profound than any words carved into flesh and blood. Chapter 167 The Star on the Tip of the Wand. The Room of Requirement once again opened its embrace to its secret visitors. Unlike the first gathering, which was filled with a mix of tension and curiosity, this time, the air was filled with a more determined, even urgent, atmosphere. Umbridge's cruel punishment of Harry, like a strong medicine, awakened members who still held a glimmer of hope, making the goal of needing to become stronger incredibly real and pressing. Harry stood before everyone, the faint red marks on the back of his hand, which the potion had not completely eliminated, silently recounting what had happened not long ago. His gaze swept over familiar faces, seeing anger and support. "We all know why we're here." Harry's voice was much steadier than last time. "Carrying a hardness born of trauma, it's not enough just to say the spell, we need to make the spell truly work today. We continue to practice Expelliarmus, but not just to make the wand fly out, we need to be faster, more accurate." He demonstrated several times, and the red Expelliarmus beam accurately hit the dummy, causing the wand to fly out. Everyone began to practice, and for a time, Red light flashed in the room, and the sound of dummies falling to the ground was incessant. Progress was evident, but Harry keenly noticed that many people's spell power was not concentrated enough, and their flight paths were slightly scattered. Hermione observed from the side, looking at Lynn. Sending a silent invitation with her eyes. It was time. Lynn nodded slightly and stepped forward. His appearance slowed the pace of practice slightly, and everyone looked at him curiously. After the magical calming the mind at the first gathering, no one underestimated this Ravenclaw, who usually didn't say much but always seemed unfathomable. Harry's guidance is excellent, Lynn first affirmed Harry, then changed the subject. Accuracy and power are key in a duel. Perhaps we can try to understand the use of magic from another perspective. He didn't pull out his wand. Instead, he extended his right index finger, and a point of extremely condensed silver light, like a miniature star, quietly lit up at its tip. Look, this is magic. In its most basic form, that point of silver light flickered steadily, attracting everyone's gaze. Usually when we cast a spell, he continued to explain calmly, we try to push the magic out of our bodies, like this. The silver light at his fingertips suddenly spread outwards, forming a blurred halo. Although bright, it appeared somewhat loose. The power is dispersed. Then, the halo quickly converged, regathering at his fingertip, becoming even more dazzling and solid than before. But what if, before we push it out, we first try to condense it as much as possible, like squeezing sand into a hard stone? Before he finished speaking, that extremely condensed silver light at his fingertip shot out, not as a beam, but more like an invisible bullet, instantly hitting the wooden stick in the hand of a distant dummy with a crisp snap. The wooden stick broke in half, and the break was perfectly smooth. Whoa! Seamus exclaimed. Everyone was stunned by this silent yet extremely penetrating demonstration. This was completely different from the light and shadow effects of traditional spells, yet it intuitively showed what condensed power meant. This isn't a new spell, Lynn explained, the starlight at his fingertip dissipating. This is just a way of thinking about controlling magic. You can try, while casting Expelliarmus, not just to think about letting the magic rush out of the wand, but to imagine it compressing all its power into a single point at the wand tip, and then releasing it instantly. He looked at Harry. This requires extreme focus and control. Perhaps it could be called the concept of precise impact. Harry looked at his wand thoughtfully, as if he had understood something. Hermione, however, was already eager to try. She frowned, and the red light at her wand tip no longer scattered, but instead tried to converge inwards, becoming increasingly vivid and dazzling. Wow, Hermione, did you do it? Ron looked at the highly condensed red light at her wand tip in surprise. Far from it, Hermione gasped. Fine sweat beading on her forehead, but it feels completely different. The magic seems more obedient, inspired. Everyone began to try this new method. At first, it was very difficult. The light of the spell sometimes dimmed, sometimes exploded uncontrollably. Neville even dropped his wand and hit his foot because he exerted too much force, but no one laughed. Everyone was diligently exploring that feeling of condensation. Lynn moved through the crowd, providing individual guidance. He walked up to Ginny and whispered, don't use brute force. Imagine your magic is like a stream of water, and your wand is the pipe. What you need to do is not turn up the faucet, but press your finger against the opening of the pipe to make the water flow faster. Ginny adjusted according to his hint, and the next time she cast a spell, the red light indeed became much sharper. He noticed that Dean Thomas was always too impatient, so he reminded him, rhythm, pay attention to the rhythm of your breathing. Magic moves with your breath, releasing it just as you finish. Exhaling works best. Dean tried a few times, and the stability of his spells indeed improved. Hermione was one of the quickest to grasp the trick. She herself possessed extremely high magical talent and powerful control. With Lynn's guidance, the Expelliarmus she cast was not only fast, but the red light was as condensed as a physical object. And the sound it made when hitting the dummy was even crisper. She looked at Lynn excitedly, her eyes sparkling with a sense of accomplishment, and Lynn returned her approving smile. Harry also gradually found the feeling. He channeled his anger towards Umbridge and his desire to protect his companions into the spell, and an exceptionally powerful, condensed red light shot out from his wand tip, not only knocking the dummy's wand away but even causing the heavy dummy to stumble back a few steps. Amazing, Harry, Ron exclaimed sincerely when the meeting ended. Everyone was drenched in sweat, but their faces were radiant with excitement and satisfaction. They had personally experienced another possibility for using magic. Though it was only an introduction, it undoubtedly opened a new door. Thank you, Lynn, Harry said sincerely. This is really useful. It's your own effort. Lynn shook his head modestly. Everyone left the room of requirement in succession, carrying new gains and full of drive. Hermione and Lynn were the last to leave as they closed the magical door. The corridor returned to silence. You did really well today, Hermione said softly, her cheeks flushed from the recent exertion and excitement. That way of explaining is very easy to understand. You were the one who thought of inviting me first. Lynn looked at her shining eyes, feeling good as well, and you were the first to grasp the essence. In the dim corridor, there was only the flickering light of the torches on the walls. Hermione looked up, watching Lynn's profile, which appeared exceptionally clear in the light and shadow. A feeling mixed with admiration, dependence, and deeper affection welled up in her heart. She quietly reached out and hooked her pinky finger with his. Lynn paused slightly, then clasped her whole hand, his palm warm and dry. They didn't speak, just walked hand in hand, side by side, down the silent castle corridor, heading towards Gryffindor Tower. The warmth from their fingertips, and the successful spelllight echoing in their minds, intertwined to form the warmest comfort on this cold night. The starlight at the wand tip might extinguish, but the hope ignited in their hearts, and their tightly clasped hands would illuminate the long road ahead. Chapter 168 Senior Investigator. The pink shadow was no longer confined to the notice boards and the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. It began to spread like a toxic spore, quietly infiltrating every corner of Hogwarts. With Dolores Umbridge's perfectly polished low-heeled shoes during Transfiguration class, Professor McGonagall was meticulously explaining the precise magic control points for turning beetles into buttons. The back door of the classroom silently creaked open, and a pink, corpulent figure quietly slipped in, holding a clipboard and a seemingly ordinary quill. Umbridge, wearing her characteristic, saccharine smile, nodded to Professor McGonagall, then sat in an empty seat and began to listen intently to the lesson, her quill rapidly scratching across the clipboard, recording classroom performance. The classroom atmosphere instantly solidified. Students who had been eagerly raising their hands to answer questions froze their arms. Even Neville's accidental mistake of making a beetle grow button legs during his attempt at transfiguration, which would usually elicit snickers, failed to do so. Everyone felt a pair of toad-like eyes scanning their backs, and the rapidly moving quill seemed not to be recording, but rather fabricating charges. Professor McGonagall's lips thinned into an even finer line, but she maintained absolute professionalism, though her voice was a few degrees colder and harder than usual. It wasn't until the bell rang for the end of class that Umbridge put away her clipboard, gave Professor McGonagall another fake smile, and left with a brisk pace. Only after she was gone did the suppressed murmurs erupt in the classroom. What exactly is she writing? Ron muttered uneasily. Should I not have laughed when Seamus turned his beetle into a jumping button? She's creating a chilling effect, Hermione whispered, her face solemn. Making everyone afraid to speak freely, afraid to make mistakes, even afraid to show any traits that don't fit her standards due to fear. In Charms class, the scene replayed. Professor Flitwick's high-pitched voice noticeably faltered when Umbridge appeared. When Parvati Patil successfully made a teacup perform a complex tap dance, Professor Flitwick instinctively wanted to applaud, but his gaze met the pink figure in the back row and the constantly writing quill, and his hand, halfway raised, dropped back down. He simply said dryly, well done, Miss Patil." An invisible, suffocating pressure enveloped the castle. Laughter in the corridors diminished, and students unconsciously lowered their voices when talking, vigilantly looking around as if fearing Umbridge would pop out from behind a suit of armor or a tapestry at any moment. Even Peeves seemed to feel this oppression. His pranks became less frequent, or perhaps he just shifted targets. This omnipresent surveillance was an even greater psychological test for the DA members. Each meeting felt like dancing on a knife's edge. Hermione became the core guardian of their secret activities. She devised a series of strict safety protocols. Members confirmed identity and transmitted information using encrypted codes. For example, folding the corner of a specific page in a designated book. Routes to the room of requirement had to be dispersed and varied. During meetings, she would arrange for 2 people to take turns keeping watch in a hidden spot near the entrance, and use some small gadgets optimized from the twins that had warning functions, such as a fake stone placed in a specific position that would subtly warm up when encountering unfamiliar magic fluctuations. More importantly, in public, Hermione acted more rule-abiding than anyone else. She no longer questioned anything in Umbridge's class, and even when Umbridge was observing other classes, Hermione would deliberately ask some innocuous questions that conformed to the Ministry of Magic curriculum, or loudly provide standard answers. After one potion class, no sooner had Snape gloomily announced dismissal than Umbridge approached with a beaming smile. "Miss Granger," she called out to Hermione, who was about to leave, in her sickly sweet voice, "I've noticed your classroom performance has always been very exemplary. especially in understanding the Ministry of Magic's regulations on the safe use of potion ingredients. Hermione stopped, turned around, and offered a perfectly appropriate, slightly flattered smile. "Thank you, Professor Umbridge. I believe adhering to regulations is fundamental to ensuring effective learning and safety." As she spoke, her gaze met Umbridge's calm. Without the slightest flicker, Umbridge's bulging eyes scrutinized Hermione, as if trying to find the slightest hint of pretense or rebellion on her face. But Hermione's performance was impeccable, like a truly reformed model student. "Very good." Umbridge's fake smile seemed to become a little more genuine. "Keep it up. Hogwarts needs more sensible students like you." She meaningfully glanced at Harry, who was sneaking out of the classroom with Ron. "I will, Professor." Hermione bowed slightly, her attitude respectful. It wasn't until Umbridge turned and left that Hermione slowly straightened up, the model student expression instantly vanishing from her face, replaced by a look of mixed disgust and exhaustion. She let out a soft sigh, realizing her palms were slightly sweaty from tension. Lynn, who had been waiting around the corridor corner, walked over and handed her a thick book, as if he had just been waiting to discuss homework with her. He whispered, "Perfect performance." Hermione took the book, smiled helplessly, her voice barely a whisper. "I feel like a double agent. Every time I talk to her, I need to thoroughly wash my hands, but it's a necessary disguise." Lynn walked beside her towards the library, speaking in a voice only they could hear. "The more submissive you appear openly, the safer our actions in the shadows will be. You've attracted her main attention." Hermione nodded. She understood the reasoning, but executing it was still physically and mentally exhausting. She unconsciously moved a little closer to Lynn, drawing strength from his steady presence in the evening. In a quiet corner of the library, Hermione was engrossed in NEWT-level ancient runes materials, preparing for advanced protective spells that might be involved in the next DA meeting. Lynn sat opposite her, seemingly reading an obscure book on celestial magic, but in reality, his mental energy was subtly spread out. Sensing the surrounding magic fluctuations suddenly, he closed his book and lightly tapped the table. Hermione looked up from the mountain of books, her gaze questioning. Lynn didn't speak, but simply gestured with his eyes towards the library entrance. Hermione followed his gaze, her heart tightening. Umbridge's pink figure stood at the doorway, talking to Madame Pants, but her gaze swept across the entire reading area like a searchlight. Hermione immediately lowered her head, focusing completely on the ancient rune texts in front of her, her fingers tightly gripping her quill, as if tackling an academic challenge. She could feel that uncomfortable gaze lingering on her and Lynn's corner for a few seconds, then moving away. After a while, Lynn's voice softly sounded, "She's gone." Hermione finally let out a sigh of relief, realizing her back was covered in a thin layer of sweat. She looked at Lynn, her eyes filled with gratitude and lingering fear. If he hadn't warned her, she might have been too absorbed to notice the approach of this danger signal. "She's like a ghost." Hermione rubbed her temples, whispering, "Ghosts aren't scary, the malice of living people is," Lynn said calmly. He pushed his teacup towards Hermione. It contained still warm peppermint tea. "Drink some water, calm down." "You're amazing, Hermione, stronger than we imagined." The simple words and the warm tea, like a warm current, dispelled the chill in Hermione's heart. She picked up the teacup and sipped slowly. The tea's fresh scent allowed her taut nerves to relax slightly. In the oppressive environment filled with whispers and surveillance, their silent understanding and mutual support became the most precious sanctuary. She knew that as long as they were together, proceeding cautiously, they would surely be able to protect that starlight of true magic belonging to the DA. Chapter 169 Dream Whisperer. The nights at Hogwarts were not always peaceful, especially in Gryffindor Tower. In recent weeks, Harry Potter's nightmares had become more frequent and vivid. He no longer just dreamt of the endless corridor and the closed door. More often, he would feel as if he were possessing some cold, slimy creature, peering at the outside world from a twisted perspective, his heart filled with an unspeakable hunger and murderous intent. This night's dream was particularly terrifying. Harry shot up from his bed, his forehead covered in cold sweat, his scar burning as if it had just been seared by a hot iron. He gasped for breath, his heart pounding wildly in his chest, fragments of the dream still lingering in his mind. The perspective of a giant snake, cold, smooth scales brushing against the ground, and in the darkness, a familiar figure with his back to him, mending something by the fireplace. It was Mr. Weasley. Then came a sudden, frantic urge to attack, his vision stained red with blood. "No, no," Harry mumbled, trembling all over. He practically stumbled out of bed and rushed towards the common room, with only one thought in his mind: he had to tell Dumbledore. Mr. Weasley was in danger. His commotion woke Ron. "Harry? What's wrong?" Ron asked sleepily, but Harry had already darted out of the dormitory door. The common room was pitch black, with only the embers of the fireplace glowing faintly. Harry frantically scurried around like a headless chicken. He wanted to use the Flu network, but the fire had gone out. He wanted to find an owl, but at this hour, just as he was about to be consumed by panic, an extremely faint but unusually clear prickling sensation, like a cold needle, gently pricked Lynn's senses. He was alone in a quiet corner of the common room, reviewing the details of the most recent DA meeting and considering how to further optimize the structure of the starlight barrier. This fluctuation, cold, viscous, filled with twisted malice, originating from the same Horcrux fluctuation he had sensed before, but more active, more close. Lynn instantly opened his eyes, his gaze sharply fixed on the direction of the staircase. Almost simultaneously, he heard Harry's hurried, panicked footsteps and heavy breathing. Hermione was also awakened by the commotion downstairs. She hurried down the stairs in her pajamas and dressing gown, startled to see Harry's pale, disoriented face. "Harry! What happened, Arthur?" "Mr. Weasley," Harry stammered, grabbing Hermione's arm. "I saw it, in my dream. A big snake attacked him. He bled so much. I have to tell Dumbledore." Hermione's face also turned pale instantly, but she forced herself to calm down. "Harry, calm down. It's just a dream." "It's not a dream," Harry almost roared, the pain in his scar making him agitated. "It's real. I felt it. Just like I could feel the snake's emotions." Just then, Lynn walked over. His appearance somewhat stabilized the chaotic atmosphere. He didn't ask what had happened, but instead focused on sensing the extremely unstable magical field around Harry. Intertwined with the Horcrux link, that dark fluctuation was ebbing and flowing like a tide with Harry's agitated emotions. "Harry," Lynn's voice was low and steady, carrying a strange calming power. "Look into my eyes." Harry subconsciously looked up, meeting Lynn's deep gaze. Lynn didn't use his wand. He just slowly raised his hand, palm upwards. A pure, silvery white light, like a newborn star, lit up in his palm. "Very soft and not dazzling, Hermione," Lynn said softly, his eyes still on Harry. "Do you remember the energy guiding circuit we simulated? Help me stabilize it, using your magic as an anchor." Hermione immediately understood Lynn's intention. She stood beside Lynn, extended her hand, hovering above Lynn's palm, closed her eyes, and tried to mobilize her own steady, orderly magic. A warm, delicate magical fluctuation flowed from her fingertips, slowly merging with the starlight in Lynn's palm, as if placing a soft, stable halo around the leaping starlight. Lynn guided this starlight, which had merged their magic and carried a sense of tranquility and guardianship, slowly towards Harry. The silver white and pale gold intertwined halo enveloped Harry gently like a warm bubble. "Deep breaths, Harry," Lynn's voice seemed to carry magic. "Imagine you are standing under a peaceful starry sky, far away from all noise and pain. That cold touch is just the night wind. Those malicious whispers are just the distant chirping of insects." Harry's body initially remained stiff, resisting this external force, but the starlight that enveloped him was unusually soft, carrying Hermione's reassuring warmth and Lynn's purity that seemed to cleanse all impurities. The burning pain in his scar seemed to lessen a bit, and the cold murderous intent and frantic thoughts of the giant snake in his mind seemed to be separated by an invisible film, becoming blurred and distant. He tried to follow Lynn's words, breathing deeply and slowly once, twice. His tense muscles gradually relaxed, and his rapid heartbeat began to calm down. Although he still remembered the terrifying content of the dream, the immersive fear and the distorted sensation of empathizing with the snake were slowly fading. After several minutes, Lynn slowly withdrew his hand. The lingering starlight flickered around Harry a few times, finally dissipating into the air. Harry still looked tired, but his eyes had regained clarity, no longer showing the near breakdown panic from before. "How do you feel?" Hermione asked worriedly, handing him a glass of warm water conjured with magic. "Much better." Harry took the glass, his voice a little hoarse. "Thank you both." "What was that?" "An immature concept, the starlight barrier," Lynn explained, his face slightly pale, obviously having expended a lot of energy. "It aims to isolate or weaken external mental influences and negative emotions. It seems it has a certain calming effect on the influence generated by that link." He didn't explicitly mention the Horcrux, but Harry and Hermione understood. "We must inform Professor Dumbledore immediately," Hermione said urgently, remembering Harry's dream just then. The portrait hole of the common room suddenly opened, and Professor Dumbledore walked in, wearing his pajamas and a starry patterned dressing gown, with a rare serious expression on his face. "I already know." "Hermione," Dumbledore's gaze swept over the three of them, finally resting on Harry. Arthur is injured, but he's alive thanks to your timely warning, Harry." Harry sighed with relief, slumping into an armchair, feeling all his strength drained away. Dumbledore looked at Lynn and Hermione, lingering for a moment on Lynn's slightly tired face, a complex light flashing in his blue eyes. "I just felt an unusual guardian power fluctuating here. Was it you too?" Lynn nodded. "We made an attempt, Professor. The effect seems to be a bit better than expected." "Very good," Dumbledore said softly, his tone carrying a hint of approval and deeper expectation. "Continue your research. This may be more crucial than we imagine." He then gave Harry a few more instructions, telling him to go to the hospital wing to get some calming potion from Madame Pomfrey, and then hurried away, evidently to deal with Mr. Weasley's situation. The three of them were left in the common room. Once again the crisis was temporarily averted, but the shadow grew heavier. Harry's dream confirmed the danger of the Horcrux link, and while Lynn and Hermione's starlight barrier showed initial success, they still had a long way to go. Hermione walked over to Lynn, looking at his still somewhat pale face, and asked softly, "Are you alright?" Lynn smiled slightly. "Just a bit of magic depletion. I'll be fine after some rest." Hermione reached out and gently took his hand, a gentle stream of magic flowing into his body, helping him recover. This was not complex healing magic, just the simplest sharing of magic, yet it carried immense intimacy and concern. Lynn felt the warmth of her magic and her unreserved trust. His heart warmed, and he clasped her hand tightly in return. "We did it, Lynn." Hermione looked up at him, her eyes sparkling in the dim light. "We really helped Harry." "Yes," Lynn responded softly, his gaze gentle. "We did it together." Outside, the Hogwarts night sky was still deep, but in this common room, where an invisible storm had just subsided, two young guardians held each other's hands tightly, as if holding the first glimmer of light against the deadly whispers in the darkness. The road ahead was still perilous, but at least, they were no longer unprepared. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 170, The Warm Light of Christmas. The bitter cold of December tightly embraced Number 12, Grimwald Place, but inside, Molly Weasley, in her unique way, stubbornly resisted the bleakness outside and the gloom that hung heavy in everyone's heart. She conjured wreaths of holly and mistletoe, hanging them on the moth-eaten curtains, and cast a flickering snowflake charm on the dim crystal chandelier, causing tiny, unmelting magical snowflakes to drift down slowly, adding a rare festive touch to the ancient and eerie house. Christmas morning was awakened by the crackling warmth of the fireplace and the mountain of presents piled under the tree. Although the atmosphere still carried an lingering heaviness, the adults' brows were furrowed with worry about the situation, and their occasional whispers concerned the Order of the Phoenix's operations and the Death Eater's movements. For a brief moment, pure joy took over as gifts were unwrapped. The common room was filled with a rustling of wrapping paper and surprised cheers. Ron got the Chudley cannon scarf he had always wanted and immediately put it on. Delighted, Harry received a very thick, incredibly warm-looking pair of dragon hide gloves, likely Sirius's doing. Hermione, to her delight, opened a set of rare ancient runes translations, as well as a beautifully packaged box of chocolates from the Muggle world. Lynn's gifts weren't numerous, but they were all thoughtful. He sat quietly to the side, a faint smile on his lips, watching everyone's joy. Only after most of the presents had been opened did he pick up a simple yet smoothly polished dark blue small box and walk over to Hermione. "Merry Christmas, Hermione." His voice was exceptionally clear amidst the room's clamor. Hermione looked up, her face still flushed with the excitement of receiving her desired books. She took the box and opened it with some curiosity. Inside, nestled on black velvet, lay a silver necklace. The chain was delicate, and the pendant was a deep blue gemstone encased in intricate silver filigree. Upon closer inspection, tiny silver specks of light seemed to slowly swirl within the gem, as if a miniature night sky had been condensed within it. "Oh, Lynn, it's beautiful," Hermione whispered in admiration, her fingertips carefully touching the cool gemstone. When she touched the gem, she could distinctly feel a gentle and pure magic fluctuation, carrying a reassuring sense of tranquility, which resonated faintly with her own magic. This necklace reminded her of the star magic Lynn had guided at the DA meetings, and the power he used to soothe Harry's nightmares. "This is a moonstone infused with a bit of starlight magic," Lynn explained softly, his gaze gentle as he looked at her. "It can't ward off powerful dark arts, but if you feel uneasy, or if there are bad energy fluctuations around you, it should give you some warning, and perhaps even offer a very slight protection." He paused, his tone becoming more solemn. "I hope it can stand in for me, to keep you safe when you might need it." The profound meaning behind this gift made Hermione's heart skip a beat. She understood that this was not just a piece of jewelry, but a tangible expression of Lynn's concern and protection when he couldn't always be by her side. A warm current surged from the bottom of her heart, quickly spreading through her limbs, making her feel warm all over. "Will you help me put it on?" She picked up the necklace, turned around, and lifted her thick, curly hair from the back of her head. Lynn took the necklace, his fingers gently brushing against the warm skin of her nape, and with a somewhat fumbling yet exceptionally focused motion, he fastened the clasp. The tiny gemstone pendant rested against the collar of her dress, its deep blue complementing her brown eyes. Hermione let down her hair, turned around, and caressed the pendant with her fingertips, looking up at him with a radiant yet slightly shy smile. "Thank you, Lynn, this is the most special gift I've ever received. I love it." Her smile seemed to dispel all the chill of Grimmauld Place, and it melted Lynn's heart completely. He gently held her hand, which was still caressing the pendant, and whispered, "As long as you like it, as long as you are safe." Their gazes met in the air, and the surrounding clamor of gift opening seemed to instantly fade away. A silent, warm sentiment flowed quietly between them. No need for many words. Their unspoken understanding and concern at this moment were more eloquent than 1,000 words. This idyllic tranquility was broken by Mrs. Weasley's call for everyone to come for Christmas dinner. The long dining table was laden with roasted turkey, honey-glazed ham, Yorkshire puddings, and various vegetables. Astonishingly abundant. Even Sirius, who is usually picky about food, wore a satisfied smile. The dinner atmosphere became much livelier. Fred and George, with beaming faces, recounted their grand plans for developing new products, trying to recruit Lynn for more technical inspiration. Lupin gently inquired about Harry and Hermione's schoolwork. Ginny and Ron engaged in a fierce battle for the last chicken leg. Mrs. Molly continuously refilled everyone's plates, her face glowing with contentment. However, the warmth of the holiday could not fully conceal the weight of reality. After dinner, as everyone gathered around the fireplace, enjoying treacle tart and hot butterbeer, the flames in the fireplace suddenly turned emerald green, and Kingsley Shacklebolt's earring-adorned head appeared in the fire. "Sorry to interrupt your holiday, Albus Alastair." His voice was low and urgent. "News has confirmed that several notorious Death Eaters have appeared in Northern Europe. Near Durmstrang. Karkaroff seems to be in some trouble. Also, several very sinister items have recently surfaced from Borgin and Burke's in Nocturne Alley, their origin unknown." The relaxed atmosphere instantly vanished. Dumbledore and Moody immediately stood up and walked to the fireplace, engaging in a low-voiced conversation with Kingsley. Sirius's face darkened, and Lupin sighed softly. Harry's hand tightened around his cup, his expression once again becoming solemn. The bubble of happiness was burst, and the cold reality once again reminded everyone that the wheels of war were slowly grinding forward, and no one could truly remain aloof. As night deepened, the celebrations gradually subsided. Hermione returned to the room she shared with Ginny but did not immediately go to sleep. She walked to the window, looking out at the quiet, lightly snowing square, her fingers involuntarily caressing the moonstone necklace on her chest. Again the gemstone felt warm to the touch, and the tiny starlight within it seemed to respond to her touch, slowly swirling, carrying a comforting power. She recalled Lynn's focused gaze when he put the necklace on her, and his words, "to keep you safe." And the anxiety and unease she felt from Kingsley's news seemed to be somewhat soothed by the tranquil power emanating from the necklace. A soft knock came from outside the door. Hermione opened the door, and Lynn stood outside. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his gaze falling on the necklace on her chest, his eyes gentle. Hermione nodded, stepping aside, a little worried. Lynn walked into the room, leaving the door open. They stood side by side at the window. "Things are getting more and more tense, aren't they?" Hermione asked softly, a barely perceptible tremor in her voice. "Yes," Lynn didn't deny it. He looked at the deep night outside the window. "But precisely because of that, we need to cherish this warmth even more, and protect those around us." He turned his head and looked at her profile, illuminated by the snowlight outside the window. "Remember, no matter what happens, we are together. This necklace is a small promise. I will do everything I can to keep you safe." Hermione's heart was filled with complex emotions, fear for the future, but more so, the immense sense of security and a longing for warmth brought by the person beside her. She gathered her courage, reached out her hand, and tightly grasped his. "We will both be safe," she said firmly, as if telling him, and also telling herself, as long as we are together. The snow continued to fall outside, and number 12, Grimmauld Place stood quietly in the winter night, like an isolated island providing shelter in the lull of a storm. And behind one of the windows, glowing with warm light, two young souls leaned closely together, holding tightly not only each other's promises but also the unextinguished glimmer of hope and protection in the darkness. This Christmas, gifts might gather dust, and the feast would eventually end, but the warmth quietly fastened around her neck and imprinted in her heart would sustain them through the longer winter ahead. Chapter 171 Barriers of Thinking. After the Christmas holidays, Hogwarts Castle seemed to awaken from a brief, unreal warm dream, once again enveloped in a cold and oppressive atmosphere. For Harry Potter, this oppression had a more specific and unpleasant direction. Weekly occlumency lessons with Professor Snape in his underground office, filled with strange potion ingredients. This was an absolute disaster. Concentrate, Potter, Snape's cold, oily voice echoed through the gloomy office, with undisguised distaste. Clear your mind. Banish all emotions and memories. Or do you enjoy allowing the Dark Lord to pry into your insignificant worries? Harry knelt on the cold floor, having just broken free from yet another failed occlumency attempt. The scar on his forehead burned painfully, and the humiliation of Snape forcibly sifting through his fragmented memories still lingered in his mind. He was panting, sweat dampening his fringe, his green eyes filled with anger and frustration. I'm trying, Harry retorted, gritting his teeth. Your efforts are worthless. Snape looked down at him, his black eyes devoid of any warmth. Your mind is like an open, vulgar pulp novel, available for anyone to read. The Dark Lord won't have to try hard to find what he's looking for. Or are you actually quite willing to share your secrets with him? This almost insulting teaching method, coupled with Harry's deep-seated distrust and resistance towards Snape, turned every training session into mental torture. The more nervous and angry Harry became, the more open his mind was, and the more fiercely the memories and emotions he tried to hide were revealed to Snape, and to Lord Voldemort, whom he feared. After several training sessions, Harry's condition visibly worsened. The dark circles under his eyes deepened, he often zoned out in the common room, and his temper grew increasingly volatile. Ron tried to comfort him, but was often rebuffed by Harry's bad mood. Hermione watched all of this with concern. She knew that learning occlumency was crucial for Harry, but Snape's methods were clearly counterproductive. He's not teaching him at all, Hermione complained to Lynn one evening in the library, her voice low and filled with frustration. He's just humiliating him, provoking him. This will only make Harry's emotions more unstable. Occlumency requires extreme calm and control. Lynn put down the book on ancient mental protection rituals he was reading, looking thoughtful. I've observed Harry's state several times after training, he said slowly. His mental energy field is very disordered, full of defensive agitation from being forcibly invaded. Professor Snape's methods might be effective, but only if the learner can overcome the immense mental pressure it generates. He looked at Hermione, his gaze calm. This makes me think about the similarities and differences between the starlight barrier we are researching and orthodox occlumency. Hermione was immediately drawn to the topic, leaning forward slightly. How so? Occlumency, according to the limited records, is more like constructing a solid, impenetrable fortress around the mind. Lynn drew a closed circle in the air on the table with his finger. It requires the practitioner to suppress and hide all emotions and memories, completely sealing off the self. The advantage is strong defense. Once mastered, it's difficult to break through. But the disadvantages are also obvious. It's extremely difficult to master. Requires extremely high willpower and emotional control from the learner, and it's too passive. He paused, then continued. Our starlight barrier, however, has a different approach. It doesn't try to build an impenetrable fortress, but rather, to create a constantly flowing mist that refracts light, or a layer of energy field with filtering and purifying functions. He drew some flowing, spreading lines around the circle. It doesn't require the user to completely suppress emotions and memories, that would be almost impossible for Harry, but rather aims to weaken, interfere with, and purify external mental invasion forces. It focuses more on the essence of guarding and purifying, rather than absolute sealing. Hermione's eyes lit up. She quickly grasped the key point. You mean, occlumency is hard defense, requiring absolute internal control, while the starlight barrier is more like soft defense or an interference field, focusing on processing external energy? That's one way to understand it. Lynn nodded approvingly. For Harry's current state, the starlight barrier approach might be easier to get started with. He doesn't need to immediately learn to seal off all emotions. He only needs to, when he feels an invasion, guide our starlight magic to form a protective buffer layer, weakening the direct impact of that connection. This might buy him time, stabilize his emotions, and then he can try to use traditional occlumency techniques. He picked up a quill and sketched a few simple energy circuit models on a blank piece of parchment. See, if we partially shift the stable core of the barrier from the practitioner's own mental power to external, gentle starlight magic, it might lower the demands on Harry's self-control. Hermione was completely immersed in this academic discussion. She took out her own notes, rapidly adding to Lynn's ideas and suggesting modifications. Their heads were close together, quills rustling on parchment, sometimes debating, sometimes reaching agreement. The sky outside the window gradually darkened, and Madame Pants, the librarian, had already begun to cast wary glances into every corner, but they were oblivious. But the defensive strength of the starlight barrier is definitely not as strong as a fully developed occlumency. Hermione finally put down her pen, rationally analyzing the disadvantage. It might not be able to completely block legilimency of Lord Voldemort's intensity. Yes, Lynn admitted, it's more like an auxiliary defense line, or rather, a transition and preparation before learning orthodox occlumency. It can help Harry stabilize first, build confidence, instead of spiraling out of control under Snape's provocation, as he is now. The discussion temporarily concluded. Both felt a little tired, but their spirits were excited by the clash of ideas. Hermione looked at the dense notes and sketches on the parchment, her heart filled with hope. Perhaps we could find an opportunity to mention this idea to Harry, she tentatively asked Lynn. Even just letting him know there's another possibility might ease his pressure. Lynn pondered for a moment, then nodded. We can try. But we must be very careful not to cause Professor Snape to misunderstand, nor to let Harry become dependent. This is ultimately his own battle. He looked up, noticing the faint fatigue at the corners of Hermione's eyes, and his tone softened. However, before that, shouldn't a certain Miss Know-it-all get some rest? You've been staring at these ancient runes for almost 3 hours. Hermione froze for a moment, then felt the soreness in her eyes and mental weariness. She gave an embarrassed smile. I just got carried away. Lynn reached out and gently took the quill from her tightly clasped hand, his movement natural. Come on, I'll walk you back to Gryffindor Tower. We'll continue these theories tomorrow. His concern warmed Hermione's heart. She obediently stood up, gathered her things, and left the library with Lynn. The corridor was silent and empty, only their footsteps echoing. Thank you, Lynn, Hermione said softly, not just for this new idea, but for everything. Lynn turned his head to look at her. In the dim light, her silhouette appeared soft yet resolute. We are a team, Hermione, he replied simply, his voice carrying an undeniable firmness. Your worries are my subject of study. These words touched Hermione more than any direct declaration of love. She quietly tucked her hand into her robe sleeve, her fingertips inadvertently touching the cool moonstone necklace at her chest, as if drawing endless strength and courage from it. Harry's battle continued. A mental barrier could not be built overnight. But on this difficult path, he was not alone. Someone, in a place he could not see, was working hard to light another lamp that might show him the way. And those holding the lamp, in their mutual support and understanding, walked even more resolutely. Chapter 172 DA's Growth. Inside the room of requirement, the air vibrated slightly with the intensity of focus and the surge of magic. Unlike the initial awkwardness and tentative attempts of the first few gatherings, the Defense Association, DA, now operated like a finely tuned instrument, each part working efficiently in its own orbit. The most significant change was Neville Longbottom. He stood before a practice dummy, his round face no longer showing his usual hesitation and fear, but rather a firm set to his lips and focused eyes. His arm, gripping his wand, rose steadily as he clearly enunciated the spell, Expelliarmus. A condensed red beam precisely struck the wooden stick in the dummy's hand. The stick flew up, tracing a neat arc in the air before landing far beyond the mat. It was no longer the weak, sometimes even disarming, red light of before. Excellent, Neville, Harry couldn't help but exclaim, his face beaming with genuine joy. Neville's face instantly flushed, but this time not from embarrassment, but from excitement and pride. He scratched his head, giving a simple, honest smile, and looked at Lynn and Hermione who stood nearby. It was Lynn's unique concept of condensing magic and Hermione's tireless help in correcting his gestures and breathing rhythm that had allowed him to gradually find the knack for controlling his magic. He's like a completely different person, Ron whispered to Harry, his voice full of disbelief. Last week he almost set Ginny's hair on fire with a levitation charm, and now, Merlin, his Expelliarmus is better than mine. It wasn't just Neville. Ginny Weasley's bat bogey hex had become fast and fierce, with swarms of black bats swooping towards the dummy so realistically that Parvati shrieked. Luna Lovegood, though still looking a bit dreamy when casting spells, always made her impediment jinxes appear from the most unexpected angles, effectively hindering the enemy's attacks. Even Ernie Macmillan, who usually preferred theoretical study, could now impressively sustain a shield charm for a considerable duration. The overall combat effectiveness of the DA had achieved a qualitative leap in a short period, and all of this was thanks to Lynn and Hermione's near-perfect teaching collaboration. The two of them seemed to naturally complement each other. Lynn was responsible for providing novel magical ideas and energy application techniques that stepped outside traditional frameworks. He would use the most concise language to pinpoint the energy core of a spell or demonstrate how to achieve better effects with less magical consumption. His explanations were often incisive and went straight to the essence. Hermione, on the other hand, was the most outstanding practical converter and detail controller. She could quickly understand Lynn's theories and break them down into clear, easy-to-follow practice steps. Whenever a member encountered a bottleneck, she could always keenly identify the problem, perhaps a few degrees off in wrist angle, an incorrect emphasis in the spell's intonation, or a mismatch in the rhythm of breathing and magic release, and propose specific solutions for improvement. Seamus, condensing magic isn't about shouting. Hermione walked over to Seamus, who was struggling with the exploding charm, and patiently demonstrated, feel the magic rotating at your wingtip, like winding a spring, and release it at the last moment. Yes, just like that. See, this time it only smoked, no explosion. On the other side, Lynn was guiding Dean and Lavender in practicing the linkage of the shield charm. Don't fight individually, he gestured for them to stand closer. Imagine your magical barrier subtly merging at the edges, forming a larger, mutually supporting shield. Feel each other's magical fluctuations. Yes, try to synchronize. When Lynn proposed a relatively abstract concept, Hermione would immediately supplement and explain it with solid magical principles. When Hermione got bogged down in a technical detail, Lynn could provide direction from a higher energy perspective. They didn't need much communication. Often, a glance or a gesture was enough for them to understand each other, seamlessly connecting once. While explaining how to deal with multiple enemies, Lynn mentioned using the idea of gravitational perturbation from star magic to deflect attacks from secondary directions. This idea was a bit advanced, and many members looked confused. Hermione immediately stepped forward. She didn't directly explain the complex concept, but cleverly simplified it. Everyone can imagine this as creating several invisible, smooth little slopes around your body. When a spell isn't coming directly at you, it might slide off these little slopes, allowing you to concentrate on the primary threat. This vivid analogy immediately brought understanding to everyone, and they had a direction for their practice. Lynn looked at Hermione, his eyes full of admiration. He whispered to her, "You always find the perfect way to make complex things simple." Hermione returned his smile, her cheeks slightly flushed. "You provided the treasure, I just helped draw the treasure map." They stood side by side at the edge of the practice area, watching the members practice with enthusiasm. An indescribable sense of accomplishment and unspoken understanding flowed between them. They were not only lovers but also the most compatible comrades and partners. The DA members had long been accustomed to seeing them as a whole, and when they encountered difficulties, they would instinctively look at both of them simultaneously. When the meeting ended, everyone was tired but exhilarated. Neville voluntarily stayed behind to help tidy up the scattered mats. Ginny and Luna discussed how to combine the bat bogey hex and the impediment jinx. The twins surrounded Lynn, trying to coax out more prank-related inspirations from magical perturbation. "We really did it, Hermione." Harry walked up to them, his voice filled with emotion and gratitude, as he looked at the revitalized group of friends before him. They all have the ability to protect themselves now. It's the result of their own hard work," Hermione said modestly, but the sparkle in her eyes showed her pride. Lynn nodded, his gaze sweeping over the faces full of vigor and confidence. "The spark has been ignited, and it's starting to glow." Leaving the room of requirement and returning to the common room, Hermione and Lynn naturally fell behind. The corridor was quiet and empty, with only their soft footsteps. "Sometimes I feel," Hermione said softly, her voice carrying a hint of dreaminess, "that we are doing something truly remarkable. Not just fighting Umbridge, we are sowing seeds." Lynn finished her sentence, his voice steady. "In a winter where lies try to stifle truth, we are planting seeds named strength and courage." Look at Neville, he found his confidence. "And that's more important than learning 10 spells." Hermione looked at him deeply. He always saw so far and so clearly. She couldn't help but reach out and link her arm through his, resting her head gently on his shoulder, even if it was only for a few short steps. Luckily, I have you by my side, Lynn. Her voice was as light as a feather's brush. Lynn said nothing, merely covered her hand on his arm with his other hand, his fingertips warm and strong. Silent companionship and support spoke volumes more than 1,000 words. The DA was growing, like new shoots breaking through the darkness, stubbornly absorbing the nourishment of knowledge and belief. And in this secret nursery, two young hearts, bound by common ideals and unreserved dedication, grew closer and closer, like intertwining vines, supporting each other and facing the future storms together. Chapter 173 Traps and Illusions. The pink shadow never truly left Hogwarts. It merely lurked, like a hibernating viper, waiting for an opportunity to strike a fatal blow. Dolores Umbridge had never believed in the students' good behavior, especially Harry Potter and his like-minded friends. Although the DA's activities were secretive, the regular disappearance of dozens of students couldn't help but cause a ripple. All she lacked was evidence the trap was quietly set on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Umbridge convened their newly recruited inquisitorial squad, primarily composed of ambitious Slytherin students, led by Draco Malfoy, for a secret meeting. "We have reason to believe," Umbridge said in her sickly sweet voice, a falsely serious expression on her face, "that an illegal, unauthorized student organization exists within the castle, secretly practicing dangerous magic." She surveyed the excited and fawning faces before her. "Your mission is to closely monitor the movements of specific students, especially Potter, Granger, Weasley, and that Ravenclaw Evans. Document their unusual gatherings and find their secret hideout." Malfoy's pale face broke into a triumphant smile. He had long wanted an opportunity to get revenge on Potter and his friends. "Don't worry, Professor," he drawled, "we'll follow them like shadows." Umbridge nodded in satisfaction, adding the most crucial element, "I have been authorized to use some special detection magic. I have already set up honesty detection fields and image echo charms in several potentially secluded areas of the castle. As soon as they step into these areas and use magic, the monitors in my office will immediately alarm and record the images." She waved a screen glass-like device embedded with pink gemstones. She deliberately leaked this information to the inquisitorial squad, knowing that these impetuous students would find it difficult to keep a secret entirely, and the news would eventually leak out through some channel. This was a double trap. Either the DA would walk right into it, or they would cease their activities out of panic, achieving the same goal of suppression. However, Umbridge overlooked one detail. There weren't only wizards at Hogwarts on Thursday evening. The DA planned to meet as usual. As Harry, Hermione, and Lynn were preparing to leave Gryffindor Tower, a high-pitched, anxious voice suddenly spoke in Harry's ear. "Harry Potter." "Sir." Harry jumped, turning around to see the house elf Dobby standing behind an empty candelabra, his large, tennis ball-like eyes filled with panic, his enormous ears flapping nervously. "Dobby? What are you doing here?" "Harry Potter must be careful." Dobby wrung the tattered old pillowcase he wore, his voice trembling. "Bad Professor Umbridge. She has set an evil trap." Dobby heard it when he was cleaning her office. "She has set up telltale magic near the tapestries on the 8th floor and in the mirror corridor on the 5th floor. She also has young Master Malfoy and his cronies watching you." This news was like a splash of cold water, freezing the trio instantly. "The tapestries on the 8th floor, isn't that outside the room of requirement?" Hermione's face instantly turned pale, her voice tight. How could she? It's not a coincidence," Lynn analyzed calmly, his eyes sharp. "She might just suspect those areas and is doing a wide net search. But she has set up detection magic, and that's a definite threat. We must cancel the meeting." Harry decided immediately. "Notify everyone at once." "Wait," Lynn raised a hand to stop him. He pondered for a moment, then looked at Dobby. "Dobby, can you confirm the exact locations where those detection spells are placed?" "More precise locations," Dobby struggled to recall, gesturing with his long, thin fingers. "Opposite the tapestry, beneath the third torch on the left, beneath the second floor tile at the entrance to the mirror corridor." Dobby remembers. The Bad Witch was very proud when she placed the magic, and Dobby heard her. A bold plan quickly formed in Lynn's mind. He turned to Hermione and Harry, speaking faster. "Canceling the meeting will dampen everyone's morale, and if Umbridge doesn't catch any evidence, she'll only become more suspicious and continue her investigation. We might be able to turn the tables." "How?" Harry and Hermione asked simultaneously. "Create a diversion." Lynn pulled out several small, flat, pebble-like objects from his undetectable extension charm pocket. They were inscribed with extremely tiny runes, shimmering with a faint, unstable magical glow. These are props I made earlier when studying energy simulation. They can simulate brief, low-intensity bursts of magic and chaotic magical images. He quickly explained the plan. Dobby will lead the way, and will go to the places where Umbridge set up her detection magic in advance. We'll use these props to trigger the alarms, creating the illusion that someone was secretly practicing magic there but was startled and fled in a hurry. At the same time, we'll notify the DA members that tonight's meeting is cancelled, the reason being that suspicious individuals were spotted lingering near the designated location, and for safety reasons, it's being postponed this one time. Hermione immediately understood the benefits of this plan. That way, Umbridge will think her trap worked, scattering an illegal gathering. She'll focus her attention on those wrong locations, and might even believe the DA has been scared into disbanding. And we'll just lie low temporarily, waiting for her to relax her guard. Exactly. Harry's eyes lit up. And we'll be prepared, so we can be more careful in the future, or temporarily change our meeting location. Without further ado, the trio immediately split up. Harry and Ron were responsible for notifying all DA members to cancel tonight's meeting via the two-way mirror and encrypted notes. Hermione and Lynn, led by Dobby, quietly made their way to the 8th and 5th floors in the corridor outside the room of requirement. Dobby pointed to the specific spot beneath the torch. Lynn sensed it, and sure enough, there was a hidden magical detection ripple with an official, rigid imprint. He carefully avoided the pathway, sending one of the pebble props to the edge of the detection area using a levitation charm, then activated it with a faint trace of magic. Pop! After a slight sound, like a cork popping, a brief and chaotic magical glow erupted within the detection area, accompanied by a few blurry, distorted humanoid figures, then quickly dissipated. One could almost imagine the pink monitor in Umbridge's office now flashing with alarm. Recording this conclusive evidence, they repeated the process, creating the same illusion in the mirror corridor. The operation was clean and precise, leaving no traces pointing to them personally. The next day, Umbridge pompously announced at breakfast that she had successfully foiled an illegal and dangerous student gathering attempt and warned certain ill-intentioned students not to challenge her authority again. She looked extraordinarily triumphant, clearly believing her trap had been a resounding success. Malfoy and his cronies also cast provocative glances at the Gryffindor table. Harry, Hermione, and Ron tried to look dejected and uneasy, but secretly breathed a sigh of relief. That evening, in a corner of the common room, Hermione couldn't help but whisper to Lynn, "You reacted so quickly, Lynn. If it weren't for your little props and Dobby, it was Dobby's credit. He took a great risk," Lynn said seriously. "And it was a decision we made together." He looked at Hermione, with a hint of lingering fear and deeper resolve in his eyes. "This was a close call, reminding us that we must be even more careful in the future. Umbridge won't give up easily." Hermione nodded, subconsciously touching the moonstone necklace at her chest, feeling its cool touch and the stable magic within. "I know," she said softly, then looked up at him, giving him a warm smile filled with complete trust. "But with you here, I feel like we can handle any trouble." Her smile dispelled the last trace of solemnity from Lynn's brow. He reached out and gently squeezed her hand, a reassuring warmth spreading from his fingertips. "We're in this together," he repeated the unchanging vow. The crisis was temporarily averted, the trap cleverly transformed into a smoke screen. The DA's spark, after this thrilling experience, not only didn't extinguish but instead built stronger trust and vigilance among its members. And between Lynn and Hermione, the unspoken understanding and reliance forged in crisis became even more unbreakable. Chapter 174: Lightning and Stars. The pressure of the term, like the increasingly heavy clouds outside the castle, weighed heavily on everyone's hearts. The approaching OWL's exams made the library overflowing, and the consumption of parchment and ink reached astonishing figures. However, for Harry Potter, what was more suffocating than the exams were the increasingly frequent and clear visitors in his mind. On Saturday morning, a suppressed, pain-filled roar came from the boys' dormitory, waking several students who were studying early in the common room. Ron stumbled down the stairs, his face ashen. "It's Harry," he panted to Lynn and Hermione, who were sitting together discussing a complex runic translation. He had a nightmare again. This time it was really bad. Hermione's quill clacked onto the parchment, splattering a small ink stain. She and Lynn exchanged glances, both seeing the gravity in each other's eyes. The two immediately got up and rushed upstairs with Ron. Harry sat on the edge of his bed, his hands buried deep in his sweaty black hair, his body trembling slightly uncontrollably. His face was as pale as the bedsheet, and the lightning bolt scar on his forehead was a vivid, fresh red, as if it had just been reopened. Hearing footsteps, he suddenly looked up, his green eyes filled with almost frantic fear and urgency. "Sirius," he growled hoarsely, grabbing Ron's arm, who was closest to him, his nails almost digging into the flesh. "They've got Sirius. At the Ministry of Magic. That room with the archway, the Department of Mysteries. Lord Voldemort is torturing him. I saw it. I heard his screams." His words were like broken glass, sharp and chaotic, yet carrying a chilling sense of reality. "Harry, calm down." Hermione quickly stepped forward, trying to soothe him. "It might just be a dream. You know, that connection might make you see false things." "It's not false." Harry excitedly shook off her hand, his eyes wild. "This time it's different. I felt it. It's Lord Voldemort. He's triumphant. He's using Sirius to lure me there. I have to go to the Ministry of Magic now." As he spoke, he tried to jump off the bed, but Ron and Lynn held him down tightly. "Harry, calm down and think." Ron hugged his shoulders firmly. "It's too obvious. If you know who really caught Padfoot, why would he let you see it? This is clearly a trap." "I don't care if it's a trap," Harry struggled, his strength astonishing. "I can't let him die because of me. I already caused Cedric's death, I can't cause Sirius's death too." The common room fell into a brief period of chaos and stalemate. Harry's emotions were completely out of control. The intense pain from his scar and the strong empathy from the dream prevented him from thinking rationally just then. Lynn stepped forward. He didn't grab Harry, but instead gently placed his palm over Harry's tightly clenched, white-knuckled fist. A trace of extremely gentle, moon-like cool starlight magic slowly permeated, not trying to suppress, but merely soothing the restless spiritual energy field like a sedative. "Harry," Lynn's voice was not loud, but exceptionally steady, as if carrying a calming power. "Look into my eyes." Harry's struggling movements paused, his bloodshot eyes meeting Lynn's calm and profound gaze. "We believe what you saw," Lynn said clearly, word for word. "We believe your feelings. Precisely because we believe, we absolutely cannot jump directly into a trap meticulously laid by the enemy. That would not only fail to save Sirius, but also put yourself, and even more people who care about you, in danger." Hermione immediately understood Lynn's intention, and she interjected, her tone quick and rational. "Harry, let's verify first. Verify in the safest way. There are Order of the Phoenix members stationed at Grimmauld Place. We can contact them immediately via the Flu network to confirm if Sirius is safe at home." This suggestion was like a bucket of cold water, somewhat extinguishing the burning flame of impulsiveness in Harry's mind. He gasped, looking at Hermione, then at Lynn, the madness in his eyes receding slightly, replaced by a glimmer of bewildered hope. Right. Contact headquarters," he murmured. "Ron." Lynn turned to Ron. "Go to the fireplace in the common room downstairs and keep watch, to prevent Umbridge or anyone else from suddenly coming in." Ron nodded immediately and quickly ran downstairs. "Hermione, accompany Harry to Professor McGonagall's office to borrow her office's flu powder. It's safer there and less likely to be overheard." Lynn continued to deploy, his thoughts clear. "Just say it's an extremely urgent matter regarding OWL's revision materials that requires immediate contact with Mrs. Weasley. Try to contact Grimmauld Place directly to confirm Sirius's situation." "What about you?" Hermione asked. "I'll go find Professor Dumbledore, or at least an Order of the Phoenix member, to report this situation," Lynn said in a deep voice. "Regardless of whether Sirius is safe, Lord Voldemort's intention to set a trap using Harry's dream is already very clear. The Order of the Phoenix must know and be prepared. We'll proceed on two fronts, verification and seeking aid simultaneously." This calm and thorough plan was like a firm rope, pulling Harry back from the abyss of impulsiveness he was about to fall into. He took several deep breaths, trying to calm his still pounding heart, and nodded. Okay, we'll do as you say." Action commenced immediately. Ron anxiously stood guard at the common room door. Hermione supported the still somewhat weak Harry, walking quickly towards Professor McGonagall's office. Lynn, meanwhile, turned and his figure quickly disappeared around the corner of the stairs leading to the higher levels of the castle under Professor McGonagall's slightly surprised but not overly obstructive gaze. Hermione used the excuse that Aunt Molly sent very important revision notes that needed immediate confirmation. Harry, with trembling hands, grabbed the flu powder, threw it into the flames, plunged his head into the green flames, and shouted loudly, "Number 12, Grimmauld Place, The waiting seconds stretched into what felt like centuries. Harry's heart was practically pounding out of his chest. Then he heard a familiar, lively voice, which instantly plunged him into an icy chill. "Oh, Harry. How could you? Creature can't say, but the mistress's portrait is screaming again. It's so annoying." It was Creature. Not Sirius, nor Lupin, Tonks, or any other Order of the Phoenix member. Why was Creature answering? Where was Sirius? Where is Sirius? Harry shrieked into the flames. "Master." Creature's voice carried a strange, suppressed excitement. "Master went out, on important business." Wouldn't tell Creature. Harry violently pulled his head out of the flames, his face ashen. His last hope shattered. Hermione's heart sank too. Meanwhile, Lynn found Dumbledore on the 8th floor, who was preparing to leave the castle. He concisely reported Harry's dream and their analysis and actions. Dumbledore's sharp blue eyes instantly became incredibly serious, and he immediately gave instructions to the Order of the Phoenix member beside him, possibly Kingsley or Moody. "Immediately send people to guard the perimeter of the Department of Mysteries, but do not tip them off. At the same time, confirm Sirius's exact location." Quickly, the orders were swiftly carried out. The entire Order of the Phoenix instantly tensed up. 10 minutes later, information from all three parties was consolidated. The Order of the Phoenix members who went to Grimwald Place confirmed that Sirius was safe and sound in the house. He had just been organizing things in the underground vault and hadn't heard the Flu Network call, and the perimeter of the Department of Mysteries also reported no signs of large-scale Death Eater activity. A trap. A complete and utter trap, meticulously designed to exploit Harry's deep affection for Sirius and the Horcrux connection. It was a false alarm, but everyone broke out in a cold sweat. If it hadn't been for Lynn and Hermione's calm dissuasion and two-pronged verification plan, Harry might have already stormed into the Ministry of Magic alone. Falling into Lord Voldemort's clutches, Harry collapsed into a chair in Professor McGonagall's office, the fear of what might have been washing over him like a cold tide. He looked at Lynn, who had arrived promptly, and Hermione, who had stayed by his side, his eyes filled with gratitude and remorse. I almost," his voice choked. "You just care too much." Hermione gently comforted him, patting his shoulder. Lynn walked up to Harry, his gaze calm and firm. "Harry, remember this feeling. Remember how anger and fear tried to control you. This is a challenge we must face together in the future. Your heart is the source of your strength, but it can also become your weakness. We need to control it better." His words were like a brand, deeply etched into Harry's heart. This time, the lightning-fast impulse was guided by starlight calm reason, averting a disaster. And in this sudden crisis, the unspoken understanding and trust between Lynn and Hermione, like tempered steel, became even more resilient. They knew that the road ahead would only be more perilous, but as long as they stood side by side, they could illuminate each other's path forward. Chapter 175. Before the Thestral takes off. The room of requirement had never been so crowded, yet so silent. DA members, having received the urgent summons, arrived one after another, their faces still showing the confusion and grogginess of being disturbed from sleep or study. However, when Harry, in a hurried and hoarse voice, recounted the dream he had just seen about Sirius being tortured by Lord Voldemort in the Department of Mysteries, all sleepiness was instantly replaced by cold fear and tension. "We have to go," Harry's voice echoed in the empty room, carrying an undeniable resolve. "Now. Every second we delay, Sirius is in more danger." There was no hesitation, no questioning. Although everyone's heart was filled with fear of the Ministry of Magic and Lord Voldemort, a solid, rock-like trust and camaraderie had quietly formed during months of shared study and training. They were a single entity. Harry's battle was their battle. "How do we get there?" Ginny was the first to speak, her voice unusually calm, as she stepped forward to stand beside Harry. "The Flu Network is being monitored, and we haven't learned apparition yet," Hermione thought quickly, her face pale but her eyes sharp. "Thestrals. The school has carriages pulled by Thestrals. They can take us to London." This suggestion was bold and risky, but it seemed to be the only viable option at the moment. A slight stir went through the crowd, and many faces showed bewilderment. "They couldn't see Thestrals." "I can see them. I can lead them," Luna Lovegood said in her ethereal voice, as if stating a perfectly normal fact. Just then, Lynn, who had been standing silently beside Hermione, stepped forward. His gaze swept over the young, tense faces, and his steady voice cut through the uneasy air. "Before we set off, there's still a little time. Perhaps I can give everyone a simple layer of protection." All eyes focused on him. Lynn took out a few small stones from a small cloth bag he carried. They looked like ordinary pebbles but were engraved with tiny silver runes. along with a small bottle of powder shimmering with starlight star radiance. He offered no further explanation, instead pouring the powder into his palm, clasping his hands together, and softly chanting an ancient and obscure incantation. As he chanted, the powder spilled from between his fingers, transforming into countless tiny, shimmering silver specks, like stardust blown by the wind, slowly diffusing throughout the entire room. A tranquil and warm force spread with it, dispelling some of the chill caused by fear. Don't resist, Lynn's voice seemed to possess a calming magic. Feel this starlight, and let it temporarily cling to you. It is very faint and cannot withstand powerful dark arts, but perhaps at a critical moment, it can deflect a weaker curse for you, or provide a trace of strength to steady your mind. The silver specks, like living fireflies, drifted proactively towards each DA member present. When the specks touched their robe hems, arms, or hair, they quietly emerged, leaving only an almost imperceptible, extremely faint silver glow on the body's surface, as if enveloped by weak moonlight. Neville curiously looked at his hand, feeling a comforting warmth. Luna smiled, as if enjoying the marvelous moment. Ginny's hand, tightly gripping her wand, also seemed to relax a little because of it. Although the effect of this starlight star radiance amulet was unknown, at this moment, on the verge of rushing into unknown danger, any extra protection felt like a sliver of solace in the darkness. This can only last for a very short time, perhaps an hour or two. Lynn finished casting, his face slightly weary, but his eyes still clear. I hope none of you will need it. After the brief preparations, Harry took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the door. Let's go. The crowd began to move silently and orderly towards the door, the atmosphere as heavy as solidified lead. Everyone knew that the path they were about to embark on might be a point of no return. Lynn and Hermione naturally fell to the back of the group. Before stepping through the door that would change many destinies, Hermione suddenly stopped and turned around. Her face appeared somewhat pale in the lingering starlight star radiance of the room, and her brown eyes were filled with unconcealed worry for the safety of everyone ahead, and also for the person beside her whom she cared for deeply. Lynn, she called softly, her voice carrying a barely perceptible tremor. Lynn also stopped and turned to face her. He didn't speak, but simply gazed quietly into her eyes, as if wanting to engrave her image deeper into his heart. Hermione reached out and tightly grasped Lynn's hand. Her palm was cold and covered in fine beads of sweat. Lynn immediately clasped her hand back, enveloping her coldness with his own warm, dry palm, trying to dispel her unease. You must be careful. Hermione looked up, her gaze earnestly meeting his deep eyes. All of us must be careful, you too. Lynn's voice was low and gentle. With his other free hand, he gently tucked a stray curl from her cheek behind her ear, his fingertip lingering for a moment on her warm earlobe. Stay close to Harry, and protect yourself. Remember, no matter what happens, ensure your own safety first. His fingertips seemed to carry a faint current, making Hermione's heart skip a beat. She nodded vigorously, gripping his hand even tighter, as if this was the most real and reliable strength he could give her. Time seemed to stretch infinitely in that moment, yet also felt as brief as an instant. In the dim light, at the threshold of parting to rush into battle, the two held each other's hands tightly, their gazes intertwined, 1,000 unspoken words merging into this silent gaze in clasped fingers. Worry, concern, encouragement, and that deep-seated trust and affection flowed quietly in the air. A hushed urging came from their companions ahead. Hermione bit her lower lip, finally letting go. The moment their fingertips separated carried a hint of reluctant coolness. Let's go. She gave him one last look, then turned and merged into the moving figures outside the door, the moonstone necklace on her chest tracing a faint blue light in the darkness. Lynn stood rooted, watching her back disappear into the shadows of the corridor, her cold touch and faint, characteristic scent seemingly still lingering in his hand. He took a deep breath, suppressing the turmoil in his heart, his eyes once again sharp and resolute, and stepped forward, following closely behind. The Thestrals waited at the edge of the forbidden forest, their skeletal silhouettes appearing particularly eerie under the pale moonlight. An expedition of uncertain outcome quietly began in the silent night. And the faint starlight star radiance on the warriors was the last trace of the castle's protection they carried from Hogwarts, as well as their silent concern and promise to each other. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.